This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate first part of What If Naruto Was Hinata's Wild Pet. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
A tiny demon's ears perked up as it sped past a light post, hearing its assailant's almost silent footsteps. The demon halted and sniffed the air as it dashed down the deserted street and into the darkness provided by the nighttime forest. Just as a black object pierced the air in front of the demon, its instincts took over and it leapt away from its previous location. It attempted to lose its pursuers by running in random directions and in the opposite direction of them. On the left. Boom, correct, kabloom. Nothing up. A demon watched 7 black blurs pass by him, its tails as motionless as possible. The demon decided to take a nap and discovered that it had managed to climb a tree. The demon leapt to the ground and cautiously made its way into the street, hoping to avoid being apprehended by yet another gang of ominous black-clad creatures. There it is. The tiny demon yelled in surprise as it turned its head and saw 3 black, masked beings streaking in its direction. Not knowing where to go, the little demon wasted no time in running down the street at full speed. It was dark, and the luminous circle in the sky appeared smaller and less bright than before. It made no difference. The little demon knew it would soon be taken prisoner, if only. The demon's mind conjured up the picture of a girl no older than himself, looking down with her hair in her eyes. The image was somewhat dark, but based on the demon's knowledge, she reminded it of a particular flower, primarily because of her fragrance. The girl in its mind was what the demon was presently searching for. A voice said, "Kaden. Gokakyu no Jutsu," as the demon's temperature rose sharply. In hindsight, the demon just managed to dodge the threatening blaze. As it continued, the tiny demon sensed tiny tears welling up in its eyes. Just as the earth beneath it began to crumble, the demon, its instincts working overtime, leapt into the air. The demon landed in a small opening and avoided colliding with a wall that was vertical. When it turned around, it saw that one black creature had cornered it. The black creature began to make strange movements with its hands, then raised one and inhaled deeply. When the black creature exclaimed, "Kaden. Gokakyu no Jutsu," the smaller demon simply stood there and waited for the enormous fireball to approach it. As the flame it produced engulfed the little demon, the black creature grinned. Its happiness was abruptly interrupted when a black silhouette leapt at it from the fireball. The demon jumped up and kicked the black creature in the face before it could react. When the demon landed on what seemed to be a perfectly squared hill, he walked to the edge of the hill and noticed that there were several square hills that occasionally revealed what was inside. The demon kept looking for the girl with its red, slitted pupil eyes. "Gotcha!" a voice shouted abruptly. The demon started to struggle under the grip of the other black, frightening creatures as soon as it felt something wrap around its torso and barked. The demon bit down on the black creature after losing some feeling in its torso, and it fled into the street and between the squared hills after being freed. A cloud of smoke formed in the middle of their formation, and they all stiffened, standing alert with the other black creatures. In white robes and a white hat bearing the fire symbol, an elderly man asked, "Did you manage to catch him, Tori?" Bird, the bird, which was identified as an ANBU, bowed on one knee. The third frowned. "That wasn't good news. No, Hokage. Sama." Nezumi, rat, was able to hold on to Naruto for only a few seconds before he bit his arm and ran off. One of the ANBU members assigned to watch over the 9-year-old had informed him that Naruto was writhing on the ground, seemingly experiencing a seizure. Hiruzen arrived at the boy's apartment to find it completely destroyed. The door, the walls, and the floorboards all had claw marks on them. Additionally, he noticed that the furniture was charred and splintered. "Kuma, bear." Hiruzen's voice was firm. The bear, masked Anbu, was kneeling in front of the elder cage right away. Hiruzen questioned, "You were stationed to protect the young hero, were you not?" The Anbu nodded, hesitating. The Anbu replied, "Yes, Hokage. Sama." The Anbu knew he had been caught, so he chose not to respond when asked. "Then why were there burn marks on the furniture in the young boy's room? Lock him up." Kuma was seized by the other 2 Anbu, who then vanished in a cloud of smoke. With a sigh, the aging cage closed his eyes and vanished from the roof he was standing on. A silhouette chuckled from the shadows, its work done, for the moment. Naruto leapt from his hiding spot and began to inhale deeply. He was unaware that he was not far from Hiruzen's appearance. He just knew that a familiar smell was in the air and that it was getting closer. Naruto's 9 golden tails, each 5 feet long, stood on end as he flinched and said, "Naruto." As the white robber approached him, his eyes narrowed. Naruto's ears and tails lowered as he crawled slowly toward the white-robed man, sniffing the air once more. If anything, he sensed the man's love and concern for him, rather than any desire to kill. Naruto was shivering and curled up by the man's legs, wrapping all 9 tails around his body. The only thing keeping him warm in the chilly night was his orange pants. With a regrettable smile, Hiruzen leaned down and picked up the shivering Hanyo. When 3 more Anbu suddenly materialized at his side, Naruto's shivering turned into violent shudders. Why were only a handful of his Anbu truly committed to taking care of the little Hanyo? Hiruzen muttered. Naruto's shuddering was somewhat lessened when he saw the Anbu kneeling in front of him, and Hiruzen couldn't help but smile. Hiruzen gave the 2 Anbu behind him the order, "You 2 may leave." They nodded and then vanished. The Anbu notified Hiruzen, "Hokage Sama, I have informed the other Anbu of young Naruto's capture and they have returned to base." He put a hand on the left shoulder of the Anbu and nodded. Kakashi nodded as he got up and took off his dog mask, saying, "Rise Kakashi, we are alone." Kakashi grinned despite the bandages covering his lower face and left eye. He became serious, and his eye opened again. "I hate to mention this, Hokage Sama, but your advisors have called a meeting between the clan heads. From what I know, some clan heads have complained about Naruto's unstable behavior lately and demanded a meeting between them, your advisors and yourself," Kakashi said as Hiruzen sighed. "Hello, Hiruzen. How did they find out about Naruto's odd behavior?" "I am unsure, Hokage Sama, but I can only guess from stories their kids have told them." Kakashi nodded, put on his mask, and vanished with Hiruzen holding a drowsy Naruto. "Well, let's go. I want you to accompany me and guard Naruto. I have a feeling that their assassination attempts will only grow more in number." Hiruzen glared as he entered a huge room and saw his office crowded with both irate citizens and clan leaders, though some of them seemed impartial. The clan heads must have been upset about being roused so early, Hiruzen surmised. Hiruzen waited for his advisors to speak while seated in the only cozy chair in his office. Hiruzen glared down one of his advisors and said, "Know your place, Homura. While we may have been teammates in our youth, I am your leader now and you will show me the proper respect." Naruto, who felt that most of the killing intent in the room was aimed at him, shuddered once more. "Right, of course, Hokage Sama. As I was saying, I speak for everyone when I say that something needs to be done about the boy in your arms." With an almost audacious tone, Hiruzen questioned, "What have you come up with?" A civilian said, "We should lock the demon up in a..." before a kunai was thrust into his throat, instantly killing him. Hiruzen thanked Kakashi in his mind, who was still hiding in the room's shadows. Mostly addressing his advisors, Hiruzen declared and questioned, "My law is still in place. Anyone speaking of the entity in Naruto will be killed on the spot. No mercy shall be shown to those who disobey my law. Why are there civilians in this meeting?" Speaking Naruto's name, Koharu said scornfully, "These civilians are some of the people who complained of Naruto." Koharu went on, along with the rest of the clan heads and clanless shinobi. As he caught everyone's attention, Shibi Aburame said, "I for one would like to say that I do not have any complaints about the boy." "What?" exclaimed a civilian. Heishi suppressed his yawn and remarked, "I also didn't complain about young Naruto. They chose to hold the damned meeting at 3 in the morning rather than delaying it. My daughter is not disturbed by his presence in the classroom and if she is alright, then I have nothing to complain about." With a yawn and a deadpan expression, Shikaku stated, "My kid doesn't have a problem with him either, so I don't hold anything against him. He seemed to be forcing himself to stay awake." Another man with blonde hair and a larger man nodded. A man with brown hair shouted, "Look at him, he's starting to look like it." Hiruzen said bluntly, "Haruno-san, please lower your voice." Instead of shouting at Hiruzen, the man scowled. Sume Inuzuka covered her nose and remarked, "The only thing that annoys me is his scent. He smells like a dirty fox." With a loud yawn, Naruto tensed his muscles, whether on purpose or not. While Ikaku Haruno and the civilians frowned, Hiruzen's lips formed a warm smile. "You see, his fangs, that is simply too sharp to be human." Hiruzen threatened to kill the man by saying, "Ikaku, I will not repeat myself. If you cannot lower your voice, then I will have my Anbu escort you home." Ikaku frowned but took no further action. "I will get right to the point, Hokage Sama. This boy has caused too much trouble. I am unsure what has happened to his seal, but it appears to me that he has fused with his entity. We do not know if he is a danger to everyone in this village. We were lucky that his transformation happened at night when most were asleep, but will the outcome be the same during the day?" Koharu inquired and Hiruzen didn't respond, a certain amount of truth to those words. All we are suggesting is that we contain him in a controlled environment so he may not harm anyone, Homura stated. Seeing the Hokage glare at him, he added, or himself. A man who was, for want of a better term, mummified except for his left eye suggested, how about we leave the boy under my care? Hiruzen leveled the mummified warhawk with a glare and tightened his grip on Naruto. Hiruzen rejected Danzo's suggestion, saying, you are in no place to care for a child, Danzo. Who knows what things you might try on this poor adolescent? Danzo responded, well, it's either leave him with me or lock him up in a cage of some sort. Many of the civilians and clan heads nodded in agreement. Lock him up like the animal he is. That's a great idea. Place the cage in the center of the village. Be quiet. Hiruzen looked at the person who had just yelled in shock, and the entire room fell silent. Mostly directed at the civilians who were suggesting that Naruto do the previously mentioned things, Heishi yelled, you people disgust me. How dare you treat the Yondaime's legacy like a traitor? Like an animal to be put on display as if it had no feelings. In a fit of rage, Ikaku retorted, what nonsense do you speak of, Hyuga? The Yondaime never had a spouse and never had a kid either. Staring angrily at the father of the future Banshee and husband of Konoha's notorious pink Banshee, Heishi activated his dojutsu. Heishi responded, I speak only the truth, Haruno. I knew the Yondaime well enough, but was not given enough time to complete the sentence. Heishi, that is enough, we will discuss this at another time period. For now, we will all return to our homes in. Hiruzen stood, fed up with all the nonsense everyone was saying, and Koharu said, no Hokage. Sama, we will not leave until we know that the boy will not go on another rampage. Either he is locked in a cage or is executed. Hiruzen categorically denied, I will not execute him, and Homura nodded. All of the civilians cheered, though they were obviously a little disappointed that Naruto would not be put to death. Then it is decided. He is to be locked in a cage to ensure that he will not go on another rampage. Homura said. Knowing that this was the best they could do for the young boy for the time being, most of the clan heads could only sadly agree. But this did not sit well with Heishi and Hiruzen. Hiruzen roared, hold on, I am the Hokage and I make the final decision, but Homura and Koharu merely shook their noses. We are sorry to inform you, Hiruzen, but even if you are the Hokage, if we of the council, Koharu and I, see that your decision isn't for the better of the village, we may change the decision. What do you suggest we do to prevent him from going berserk on the village again? Homura asked with an angry voice. Hiruzen parted his lips, but no sound emerged. He couldn't think of anything to do. He was unable to retain him because, particularly with the village's outcast, the villagers would believe he was favoritism. He would lose his title and his job, along with all hope for Naruto, if this were to occur. Would it be preferable to imprison Naruto until a better idea came to mind? The fox boy slept soundly in Hiruzen's arms as he gazed down at his surrogate grandson. Other than execution, what other option did he have? The elderly man began to rock Naruto steadily in his arms while he sighed and clenched his fist. I apologize, Minato. I apologize, Naruto. I have failed you both. Hiruzen gave his advisors a stern look. Hiruzen's advisors nodded in agreement that he wanted to spend some time with the boy before being separated, and he stated, he will be placed in a cage when an appropriate cage is built. In the meantime, he will stay with me since I seem to be the only one he won't see as an immediate threat. Hiruzen sensed the tension in the room rising as Koharu said, agreed. The tension vanished and everyone wanted to get out of there immediately as they exuded murderous intent. Everyone nodded as they began to file up by the door, leaving the room one by one. Everyone may return home. Any other complaints will be dealt with at a later time. For now, we rest. Staring at Naruto and Hiruzen, Heishi was the last to depart. Heishi said, in an Hyuga way, I hope you know what you're doing, you crazy old monkey. He then shut the door. Hiruzen sighed deeply and fixed his gaze on Naruto, who was now grinning. His whole body relaxed, and his 9 golden tails unlocked their muscles. Before it turned into a regretful frown, a smile appeared on his lips. After 65 years of life, Hiruzen finally shed a tear from his weary old eyes and said, I'm sorry, Naruto, I really tried. He had wept when his wife and one of his sons passed away, but this time the tears were ones of regret and powerlessness. When Naruto wiped the tear from his face with one of his tails, he opened his eyes. He noticed Naruto grinning drowsily at him, displaying an expression that Hiruzen interpreted as, you gave it your all. Hiruzen said, Do you understand me, Naruto? Naruto's smile briefly expanded before he gave a weary yip. Naruto's eyes closed for the last time that night as he fell asleep, and Hiruzen grinned as he kept holding him in his arms. To avoid waking the sleeping child in his arms, Hiruzen muttered, "I hope one day you will be free from this hell you're going through." Kakashi. Kakashi emerged in front of Hiruzen, his mask removed, and he gave Naruto a quiet look. Kakashi nodded before vanishing to carry out his recent assignment. "I want you to tell Kurenai to meet me in my office at 10 in the morning. I have a mission for her." Hiruzen couldn't think of anyone else who could do this except Kakashi, but he was needed in Anbu, and Kurenai was one of the best, most tranquil options. Whether she wanted to or not, she had to do this and she was going to do it. While completing the paperwork for Naruto's new residence, Hiruzen let out a sigh. In Hiruzen's mind, the concepts, designs, and schematics he was getting from numerous civilians were all abhorrent and disgusting, so he promptly threw them away as junk mail. A week has passed since Naruto's incident, and the village craftspeople have been working tirelessly to complete the cage that Naruto will be kept in. Hiruzen gazed down at his surrogate grandson, who lay as motionless as possible, his tails twitching from side to side every now and then. Naruto knew what was happening and was saddened by it, and his expression said it all. Hiruzen didn't know how he knew, but he couldn't do much about it anyway. He appeared to give up on life, as though he would be happy to pass away at any time to get rid of the sorrow he was experiencing. Why did the undeserving bastards who roam this planet always punish and push aside the good? What justifies punishing Naruto for an unforeseen incident like merging with his tenant? A man with a weary expression on his face walked into Hiruzen's office and approached his desk, saying, "Hokage, Sama. The artisans have sent word that Naruto's new home is finished and is now ready for him to live in." The man coughed into his bald up left fist and resisted the urge to reach into his back pocket to retrieve his cough medicine. Naruto tensed as he limped to Hiruzen's feet, away from the unidentified man. Hiruzen frowned inwardly, but the sick man nodded after observing the elder's unreadable expression. Hayate bowed and left the room, closing the door behind him before taking out the cough medicine and downing the entire bottle. "Thank you, Hayate, you're dismissed." Hiruzen glanced down at Naruto, who was much smarter than he gave off and was now calm but still tense. Naruto. When his name was called, Naruto looked up at Hiruzen and saw the elderly Kage's sorrowful, remorseful brown eyes. With venom dripping on the word home, Hiruzen said to him, "I'm sorry, but I have to take you to your new home." Naruto would be living in a place that was more akin to an animal's cage at a low-class zoo than a house. It made fun of the word home, but the narrow-minded and stupid people who lived in this village readily called it that. After responding with a nearly inaudible whine, Naruto got up off the ground, crawled to the door, and waited for Hiruzen to open it. Heartbroken, Hiruzen approached Naruto, picked him up off the ground, and embraced him. This was all new to Naruto, who had never been hugged in his life, so he tensed. With a quick poke to a pressure point, Hiruzen knocked Naruto unconscious before he could say anything more. "I'm sorry, Naruto." Hiruzen sighed as he left his office and made his way to Naruto's new prison, holding the now dead and limp boy in his arms. The agony, the injury, the blood. There had to be some action taken. However, what? Death was certain to occur if left unattended for 10 more minutes, but it was not yet lunchtime, and the next break wasn't for another 30 minutes. The consequences of not having enough blood in the body were beginning to manifest, and the blood simply wouldn't stop guzzling out of the opening if action wasn't taken right away. Hinata. Hinata looked up at the person who had called her name, and the pale, icy eyes that were typical of her clan met hers. Since her father was about to give up on her, one of her clan's elders, generously, offered to train her. "Why are you daydreaming?" I asked. They were practicing the fundamentals of the Juken a week ago. They were now dodging and or deflecting kunai and other metal and steel blades. Softly, Hinata took hold of her left arm and bowed down, avoiding the temptation to simply collapse on her face. Hinata stammered, "Even worse than usual, I'm sorry, elder, but m.m.my wound n needs to be tended t.to." She wouldn't mind if the elder knocked her out like he did yesterday following A's part, given the state she was in. Then perhaps she would get out of this hell that was supposed to be her home, if it weren't for the fact that, first of all, it wasn't appropriate for the Hyuga heiress and, second, she simply lacked the motivation to do such a thing. She would spit on that word. Her timid and compassionate disposition kept her from doing anything cruel or improper, regardless of what was done to her. What exactly did the word home actually mean? A person, family, or household's typical home is a house, apartment, or other shelter where one's domestic affections are concentrated. Is this regarded as home? To her? No, that's easy. The place she currently lived was a personal hell rather than a home, and many of her so-called family members were actually her persecutors. For her, home would be a place where she would sleep each night and awaken with calm and peace rather than fear and distrust. Home would be waking up next to Naruto or to a pleasant and contented family. Hinata was aware that she would be as red as the blood she lacks if she had any extra. Hinata's expression was sad as she recalled the boy she had been in love with, but she couldn't recall seeing him in class today. In fact, it was strange that he hadn't been anywhere for a whole week. She observed how the academy's teachers deliberately disregarded Naruto's remarks, whether or not they were appropriate, and inquiries, again, whether or not they were appropriate. They even went so far as to accuse him of doing things he hadn't actually done, which led to his expulsion from the classroom and the loss of a crucial lesson. Despite everything, he had never missed class and had consistently shown up for class each day. Although it seemed strange to her that he had never taken a sick day in the 3 years they had attended the academy, Hinata didn't mind as long as he was well. Hinata was too preoccupied with the various reasons why he might not be able to attend the academy to notice the elder in front of her lift his left hand and drop it onto her right cheek. Hinata was startled out of her reverie by the sound of a blow to the flesh that reverberated throughout the dojo they were in at the moment. She forced a questioning expression on her face and let her eyes show off their fresh, new tears. The elder shouted, "You are supposed to be the Hyuga heiress, now act like it and stop crying," and was ready to hit her once more, but Hinata fell to her knees while still clutching her left arm in an attempt to halt the bleeding. The elder grunted in disgust and turned to leave. "Go ahead and have that wound treated. You better return here in the next 10 minutes or there will be no lunch break." Hinata only heard the word, "Go," before her lavender eyes turned drab and her mind went blank, causing her to collapse on her face. The heiress's life. It's not at all like the fairy tales depict it. Naruto's eyes slowly started to flutter open, and he could feel himself beginning to regain consciousness. Nevertheless, a few issues suddenly came to mind. What the devil happened? His hearing was poor, his vision was blurry, and he had no sense of balance. With a slight ache in his neck, Naruto glanced up and saw trees and black-lined bushes scattered before him. It appeared to clear the hazy images he was seeing, so Naruto blinked several times. After a minute or so, his vision was nearly perfect again, and he was beginning to feel the sensations in his body. Whatever had struck him was powerful or successful, or both. Naruto stood on all fours and began to look around after he had finally waited for everything that was wrong with him to be fixed. He didn't know where he was. Naruto wisely turned to face the voice and tensed even more when he noticed a woman's silhouette observing him from the shadows. "So, you're awake and about already?" he asked. When the stranger made any odd movements, Naruto snarled at him and bowed his limbs to get closer to the ground. The silhouette emerged from the shadows and entered the light, saying, "Very hostile." So angered. She wore a Chunin vest, had a nice figure, and long, black hair. Beneath that were black Anbu pants and a red turtleneck shirt without sleeves. However, Naruto's attention was drawn to the red eyes that were fixed on him. She said, "Not much of a talker either." As she approached him as closely as she could without upsetting him, Naruto observed her maintaining her distance. Her stare made Naruto uncomfortable, and he let it out with a low growl and a quick yip. Kurenai walked back into the shadows and vanished from Naruto's view, ceasing to stare at him. The presence of an invisible stranger made Naruto nervous. He felt Kurenai shift further to the left, but his gaze remained fixed on the spot where he had last seen her. Kurenai marveled at how the young boy in front of her managed to find her despite her hiding place. No matter how quick or cunning she was, he would continue to track her exact location without hesitation because not even other Chunins could find her as quickly. She decided to mentally note that if this boy were to become a shinobi, he would make an excellent tracker in the future. Kurenai made the decision to observe her surroundings rather than keep futilely testing Naruto's tracking abilities. She didn't know why she and Naruto were in the cage, but whatever gets the job done. There was enough room in the cage for perhaps 1 or 2 elephants to live without experiencing any space issues. She assumed that Naruto's new home was the makeshift tower of boulders on the end of the cage, and there was a tree to her right. A futon and what Kurenai believes to be a toilet were located inside the small entrance on the left, though she was unsure. However, the location of the cage, rather than the contents, was the worst aspect of this place. As many people passed the cage and grinned triumphantly at the bewildered demon, she watched in disgust. How could they simply erect his cage close to the retail area of Konoha? Such an act was foolish and cruel. Though it's not as if it hasn't already, Naruto's classmates will soon discover him in this state, and everything in his life will drastically change. Kurenai claimed that the Hokage had told her that his cage would be in a remote training area where no one would be aware of his presence. She closed her eyes, assuming that the civilians had thought of placing it here. When she felt someone approaching the cage, she snapped her eyes open. From her hiding place, she saw a girl no older than 3 waddling slowly toward her. Kurenai would have moved to stop her, but the young girl smiled at Naruto and held out her hands, making him seem closer. As the girl's hand slowly reached his ears and petted them, Naruto became cautious. Kurenai's ears dropped as soon as he saw Naruto take a step back. As she watched Naruto's response, the young girl cocked her head to the side. Then she chuckled and gestured for Naruto to approach. Naruto, still wary of the young girl, approached her slowly and sat down while she kept petting his ears. As the young girl scratched his ears and giggled, Naruto then made a sound that sounded like a subconscious purr. Amaya. The young girl turned when her name was called, and she saw her mother marching over to her with a very angry expression on her face. The mother screamed, "No! You don't touch that!" as she reached into the cage and gave Naruto a slap on the top of his head, causing him to bolt to the opposite side. The young girl scowled as she watched Naruto leave, and she was carried away from his cage by her mother, who warned her not to approach it ever again. Kurenai frowned at the woman as well as at anyone who made fun of Naruto or smirked or sneered. Kurenai heard sniffling coming from the cage and looked down to see Naruto lying on his stomach with his head in his arms. She could see his breathing was labored, and his shoulders were trembling badly. He was in tears. Even though Kurenai didn't know Naruto well, or at all, for that matter, it was unbearable to watch the little demon now weep his little heart out. She was unsure if he considered her a threat, and if he did, she would undoubtedly die within a minute, so she dared not approach him. She could only offer remote sympathies and diminish her regard for the civilian population. Oh my! Kurenai's eyes widened as she looked up, realizing who had just screamed that. Yes, it was going to end badly. The sounds of muffled murmuring roused Hinata. The person speaking was not pleased. She cleared her vision and glanced around the room before slowly opening her eyes. With the exception of 2 doors on the other side of the room, a curtain dividing the bed from her, and a second bed to her left, the white room was largely deserted. Given that one door led to a hallway and the other to the restroom, Hinata speculated that she might be where she believed herself to be. When Hinata raised her left arm, she noticed that it was tightly bound, limiting its range of motion. She noticed that the wound she had received early on was covered in gauze wrap on her left arm. She noticed she was over an hour late for practice, and her eyes widened as she glanced at a nearby clock. She stood up blearily, but as soon as she felt her balance slipping, she put her hand on the bed to keep herself from falling. A muffled voice practically shouted, "She is not fit to be the heiress," as Hinata finally made out the previously muffled voices. Hinata stood motionless to hear the voices as her curiosity overcame her. A second voice said, "Perhaps not, but what other choice do we have?" "Papa?" As she recognized the second voice as her father, Hinata pondered. The first voice Hinata recognized as the elder she sparred with asked, "What of Hanabi?" and Hinata tensed. Hinata felt tears well up in her eyes as Hishi shot back, "She is still too young. Hinata is our only option. She was only the heiress because she was their only choice." As soon as Hinata heard her cousin's name, she stopped breathing and asked, "What of Neji?" "Neji? Why not? It will be relatively easy to transfer his seal to Hinata and he will make an exceptional heir." Hinata was shocked to learn that her own father was considering giving her Neji's seal and incorporating her into the side branch. She had to get out of here. This was too much for her. As soon as she could, Hinata opened the window to her room and leapt out, grateful to whoever was listening that she was on the first floor of the hospital and forcing her exhausted body to stand. Before she began to run as fast as she could, away from the hospital and the life she wished she had never had, she realized that it was almost night and that the sun was almost setting. Hinata paused to stroll peacefully and then began to scan the village without looking at anyone. She simply didn't know how to strike up a conversation once someone said hello to her, not because she detested them. However, she was unaware that the topic would naturally come to her when she encountered someone, so she wouldn't have to worry about what to talk about. "Hinata," said the girl, flinching as she turned to see 2 clouds approaching her. To put it mildly, Hinata was terrified and closed her eyes when she feared she would be run over by the smoke clouds. Hinata dared to open her eyes when she wasn't lying on the ground or feeling like she had been run over, and she saw Sakura and Ino panting in front of her, doubling over and attempting to catch their second wind. Ino? Sakura? Ino and Sakura stood up and each took one of Hayata's hands when their names were mentioned. Both girls began pulling her in the direction they were running from, and she squeaked. "Come on Hinata, you need to see something," Ino, still a little exhausted, managed to say. Hinata attempted to stop them as Sakura nodded in agreement. I'm sorry but if it is about Sasuke again then. Sakura interrupted, no Hinata, it's not about Sasuke, and quickly stopped with Ino facing her. Hinata blushed and, after regaining her hands, started touching the tips of her index fingers together. Look, as far as the secret crush goes, everyone knows about your crush on Naruto except the kid himself. Is it that obvious? She inquired, nearly frightened by the response. Deadpanned, both girls replied, hi, it is. The first to regain her composure and take Hinata's hand was Sakura. Still, what we want to show you will shock you. Ino said, it's about Naruto. Hinata allowed the words to sink in as she allowed herself to be pulled along by the two most prominent gossipers in their age group in Konoha. Naruto-kun. She was too preoccupied with her thoughts to realize that she was being pulled to the shopping area of Konoha and then stopped in front of a cage. She didn't notice the apparently empty cage in front of her until an anxious Ino jolted her out of her reverie. What are we doing she said, her breath caught in her throat, and her words died there. A little shadow emerged from a group of rocks, its 9 tails swishing languidly. It sat on its hind legs while using its front legs to stay upright, and its ears perked up at the newcomers. Hinata was still unable to identify it because it was still in the shadows, but she could tell by the way its head was positioned that it was observing her intently. When Hinata looked around the cage, she saw only a small tree in the upper left corner and a few bowls on the side that she assumed were where the creature ate and drank. Hinata turned to face Sakura and Ino, who were staring at the creature in the cage. As soon as she said his name, the creature in the cage began to approach Hinata, as if she hadn't noticed. Etta, why did you be? Bring me here. I thought we're going to see Naruto-kun. Sakura said, we are. Hinata turned to face the cage and saw that the creature had emerged from the shadows, confirming that it was indeed her blonde crush. Naruto's ears were golden and drooped down, just like his blonde hair, which appeared ruffled and a little dirty. He pressed his stained cheeks against the cold, hard steel bars, his crimson, sad eyes fixed on Hinata. He was attempting to approach Hinata by sticking his claws through the cage and hanging over the edge. As Naruto whimpered and attempted to push his way through the space between the bars of the cage, she stammered, Naruto-kun, What happened? Only his arms were able to pass through before he was shocked and thrown back by an electrical volt. Naruto-kun, exclaimed Hinata. Fearful of touching the steel bars, the 3 girls ran to the cage and gasped. But Hinata didn't give a damn, grabbing onto the bars and attempting to check on Naruto. Naruto-kun? Hinata watched Naruto's shadow unsteadily rise and then fall from a distance. After the first try, he remained motionless. As Hinata struggled to get through the steel bars, her heart began to race, but something was stopping her. Hinata! Ino and Sakura yelled while grabbing Hinata's shirt. They yelled, are you crazy? Once more. When a man yelled, hey, those girls need help. Oh no, the Hyuga heiress is stuck and it's all the demon's fault. A large group of people began to gather close to Naruto's cage. As the crowd grew until almost all of the civilians were present, cries of annoyance and rage could be heard throughout it. To the surprise of Ino and Sakura, they screamed for the demon to be killed or tortured. After that, the crowd pushed them back, causing them to get as far away from Naruto as possible. Hinata failed to notice the crowd gathering behind her because she was still too focused on ensuring Naruto's safety. She began to kick back because she still felt like Sakura and Ino were clinging to her. She continued to stare at Naruto, who was still not moving, with tears in her eyes. She didn't realize who was around her until a man used giant pliers to force open the cage's locked door. At last, she released the bars, and the man who was holding her swiftly pulled her out of the cage. The man ran back to the rest of the crowd and said, there, you're safe now. Hinata observed as individuals began to enter the cage one by one. When Hinata felt dazed and realized it was all a genjutsu, she rushed to the entrance. Hinata released the genjutsu that had been applied to her and made the ram sign, recalling her training. Before Hinata saw a chunin also make a ram sign and free the civilians from the genjutsu, she saw the other civilians standing in a daze. A female chunin leapt out of the darkness to confront the motionless, unresponsive Naruto. The woman yelled, you are all to walk away from here and leave, now. Hinata recognized this chunin as Kurenai, a kind woman who would sometimes stop by to check on her. After releasing the genjutsu, the chunin snarled and pulled out a kunai. You're defending the demon brat now. Sad, he appeared dangerous despite being clearly drunk. He ran toward Naruto, but Kurenai stopped him when he got in his way once more. The man rushed past her and toward Naruto before she could respond. The Chunin was about to attack Naruto, but Kurenai kicked him across the cage and got ahead of him. She was unsure if she could manage everyone at this time, especially with the inebriated Chunin, and she would have her hands full. "Pay attention," she said, blocking the inebriated Chunin's arc with her kunai while he drew more. He carelessly sidestepped it and threw 3 kunai at her after she shoved him away and threw hers at him. Everyone applauded as they approached Naruto, saying, "Now that she's busy, we can get the demon brat." Instead, after pushing through the throng, Hinata eventually managed to get a glimpse of Naruto, who was staring at her with sorrowful eyes. When Hinata eventually made it into the cage, she rushed in front of Naruto with her arms outstretched, crying as she closed her eyes and pushed harder against the crowd. She gave the civilians her best glare, but all they could do was stare at her in confusion. A man shouted, "Get out of the way so we can kill the demon." Without hesitation, Hinata shot back, "I won't let you hurt him." As everyone frowned, Naruto looked up slightly and saw the girl he had imagined standing in front of her. Naruto muttered, "Na," but was unable to continue when he saw a man approach Hinata. He snarled and attempted to stand, but the previous electrical shock essentially rendered his appendages uncontrollable. Naruto saw something he could never have predicted. The man grabbed Hinata's head and pushed her away, causing her to stumble on her legs and strike her head on the ground. After glancing at Hinata, Naruto turned to face the man. He wore the same green vest as the previous woman, but he appeared inebriated and unstable. But Naruto didn't see a drunken Chunin who might lose his position. Instead, Naruto saw a deceased man who had harmed her. Warning. From now on, it becomes graphic. You received a warning. The inebriated Chunin felt a cold, damp sensation run down his torso before he could fire at Naruto. The Chunin saw Naruto's claw piercing his chest and looked down in panic. Naruto pulled his arm back and used the soles of his feet to kick the man in the stomach. Even though the Chunin stumbled back, Naruto was far from finished. He rushed towards the Chunin and started tearing out the man's skin and limbs with his claws. A portion of the cage turned red as blood flew everywhere. In front of him, Naruto tackled a half-dead Chunin with no arms or legs. Then, using one of his blood-soaked tails, he tore off the man's head and tossed it out the open cage door. Before Naruto killed the Chunin and turned his attention to them, the onlookers were paralyzed with terror. A man yelled, "Run!" as they sprinted to the cage door and began to flee. Regretfully, Naruto was faster than them. Splat as Naruto charged through the crowds and swung his claw around at the terrified people, there was a sound of blood hitting the ground. While the others, fortunate or not, were still alive despite the fact that they would eventually bleed to death, one man was cut horizontally down the middle. Naruto used his tails to either tear out appendages or throw civilians high into the air. Naruto's right side's longest tail extended, encircled a man's neck, and tightened its grip until the man fainted and his head dropped from his shoulders. When the civilians first arrived to kill Naruto, half of them were either dead or lying in a pool of their own and other people's blood. Naruto circled them with his body low and his eyes narrowed, while the other half remained motionless. His gait gave the impression that he was a vengeful predator who had discovered his meal or victim. That was precisely what Naruto was thinking about. Naruto flinched when the ancient black creatures suddenly materialized in front of him. He recalled Hinata being knocked aside, and his fear fled him. He was aware that their purpose was to either remove him from her or the other way around. As he leapt for the first black creature, Naruto snarled even louder and easily smashed its face in. The other black creatures moved their hands at random tempos without hesitation. Naruto saw that every other creature was preparing for something after he had completed disembodying the first black creature. Doden. Shinju Zanshu no Jutsu. Naruto yelled in surprise as he was knocked to the ground, only his head visible, by a hand that grabbed both of his hind legs. 3 powerful attacks began aimed at him, and his eyes grew wide. Kaden. Gokakyu no Jutsu, Sweden. Mizu Kamakiri. As Naruto shifted uneasily in his place, the fireball and water jet were both aimed at the same target. An Anbu wearing a monkey mask slammed his hands on the ground and called forth a massive wall of dirt to rise and defend the remaining civilians before the attack would collide. As some civilians fell and others simply lost feeling in their legs out of fear, the ensuing explosion rocked the ground beneath them. When the situation subsided and there was no more noise, the Anbu went outside where Naruto had been and saw nothing but the burned ground and the hole where he had been. The Anbu were unsure of Naruto's whereabouts until he emerged from the ground and used the monkey mask to encircle the Anbu with two tails, one around the knees and one around the shoulders. Naruto threw the Anbu aside after tearing him in two with a swift and fluid motion. Naruto felt something cut his back, and he growled ferociously. As soon as the wound closed, Naruto began to look around, his red eyes catching glimpses of everything around him. He dodged the Anbu's sword swipe with lightning speed, and Naruto used one of his long tails to trip the Anbu. The Anbu was drilled into the ground after Naruto leapt to his feet and slammed all four of his appendages onto it while wearing a rabbit mask. In order to get rid of the blood on his body, Naruto shook his whole body after leaping out of the crater. His neck and most of his face were the only parts of his body that were not covered in blood. As the other two Anbu pulled out their swords and assumed a fighting stance, Naruto hunched his back. Then Naruto's mouth began to glow a sinister red, and he pried it open, causing a tiny blast to shoot out of it. When his partner, Bull, was struck by the blast and exploded, the Anbu wearing a boar mask leapt aside. A 10-foot radius was covered by the explosion from the attack. After killing his assailant, Naruto roared like a beast, and Boar materialized above him, his sword poised to cut his throat. But Naruto wasn't about to give up, so he thrust his free hand up to the Anbu's bare neck while using his right hand to grasp the sword's blade. Boar choked on his own blood while clinging to his neck, then lay down and perished. Naruto leapt over the terrified civilians and the dirt wall, landing between them and his cage. He roared because his victim had nowhere to go and could only flee by using the means of death. Hinata's eyes fluttered open and she slowly regained consciousness. Because of the lack of light, she could tell it was night when she looked around. Then she saw Kurenai being restrained by a Chunin who was threatening to cut her throat. Had Hinata heard it, she would have gone to assist her. Ah! The spine. Tingling scream startled her so much that she instantly sat up and searched for the person who had just screamed. When she saw Naruto use his right claw to cut a man in half, her eyes widened and stopped. He was the only one standing. Everyone else had fallen to the ground, bleeding and dead. As Naruto's gaze swept over the room and settled on her, she uncontrollably trembled. Before becoming depressed, optimistic, and something else, they were ruthless and frigid. Hinata. When Hinata felt a hand touch her left shoulder, she jumped. When she looked up, Kurenai was staring at Naruto and taking deep breaths. When Hinata turned back to face Naruto, she noticed that the expression in his eyes had changed back to one of rage. "We need to get you out of here." At a speed never seen before, he sprinted ahead of Kurenai before either of them could blink. As Naruto kicked her chest with the bottom of his feet, Kurenai gasped, but her breath was caught in her throat. Her back struck the bars as she flew back, extinguishing any last of her breath. Naruto snarled as he approached Kurenai slowly. He wasn't going to allow another person to injure her the way he had already done with the green vest. Hinata watched in terror as Kurenai stumbled to lift her upper body off the ground and Naruto moved as slowly as he could. As Kurenai met Naruto's gaze, every muscle in her body tensed. It seemed as though he was peering into her soul with his piercing eyes. Naruto-kun, Hinata said abruptly, embracing Naruto's back to stop him from attacking Kurenai. Before realizing that she was holding him, Naruto growled. With his tails wrapped around Hinata, who was holding on to Naruto while crying a little, Naruto sat down on his belly and whined like a reprimanded dog. She kissed his back and muttered, "This isn't you, Naruto-kun, you're not a monster, and you don't kill." With Hinata still clinging to him, Naruto stood and pulled her back to his temporary residence. There, he rolled onto his back and moved Hinata beside him with his tails. After Naruto gave her a radiant smile, Hinata fainted, blushing slightly at the intimacy he was displaying. Naruto assumed she had simply fallen asleep, so he wrapped Hinata in all of his tails to protect her from the night's chill and fell asleep himself, as Hinata unconsciously clung to Naruto. Kurenai got up and moved toward Naruto's house's entrance with the bar's assistance. She couldn't help but smile as she looked in. Even though she had witnessed the horrific incident earlier during her own battle after knocking out the inebriated Chunin, she was unable to see Naruto murdering everyone in front of her. She wouldn't even think he had just massacred the civilians and Anbu if it weren't for the blood. She sensed a second presence in the cage and spun around. The lowest she could bend without losing her balance was, well, not very low. Hiruzen looked around and asked, "What happened here, Kurenai?" It seemed to him that a minor conflict had broken out here, and based on the evidence, he would not question that it had. When the smell of blood and death hit his nostrils, he frowned and turned back to Kurenai, who was having trouble standing. "Never mind, I want you to write out a report on what happened and give it to me in the morning. For now, you should go home and rest and don't worry, someone will take your place. You will still be paid for the mission of protecting Naruto, and should you desire to, you can continue to protect him." As she started to recollect what had happened earlier, Hiruzen nodded and allowed her to speak. "With all due respect, Hokage Sama, I would rather report what I saw now." Had it not been for his knowledge that this was Naruto, Hiruzen would have been incredulous and would not have trusted anything Kurenai told him. With the correct instruction and direction, Naruto would become the best ninja and unquestionably become the Hokage because of his destruction, skill, and speed. But Hiruzen was aware that his dream would be even less realistic than it initially seemed if the village rejected him. Kurenai paused to catch his breath before continuing, saying, "And after he killed the last civilian, he knocked me away from Hinata and would have killed me if Hinata hadn't stopped him. Hokage Sama, there is something I'd like to inform you of." She took a moment to process her statement, saying, "I don't think Naruto attacked the civilians because he hated them. I actually think it's because he wanted to protect Hinata." "I see what you mean. That would explain it. After Kutra pushed Hinata out of the way and inadvertently knocked her out, Naruto saw him as a threat to her, so he killed him. It's also safe to assume that he saw the rest of the civilians as a threat as well." Hiruzen replied with a nod. Hiruzen asked, "Where is Hinata?" Kurenai turned back to Naruto's den. Following her gaze, Hiruzen made his way to Naruto's den entrance and grinned broadly as he saw Naruto encircle Hinata with his tails in a protective manner, both of their faces beaming. Kurenai said, "Hokage Sama, what's going to happen now?" Hiruzen's forehead furrowed as he considered his options. His advisors were not going to approve of this. He would have to figure out how to stop them from attacking Naruto. They had already placed him in a controlled setting and observed the results. Hiruzen needed someone else with the ability to soothe Naruto, like. As Hiruzen called his own Anbu, an idea began to germinate in his mind. Out of nowhere, an Anbu wearing a dog mask leapt down and knelt down in front of the elderly Kage. "Dog, call Heishi and my advisors to my office. When you're done, come back here to watch over the two sleeping children." Dog nodded and vanished as swiftly as he had appeared. Then Hiruzen turned back to Kurenai. "Kurenai, if you don't mind joining the meeting, I would appreciate you being there to back up my explanation to Heishi and the advisors." Kurenai gave a nod. Hiruzen nodded, and they waited for Dog, who returned 5 minutes after he had left, saying, "I would be honored, Hokage Sama." As Dog hid in the shadows, Hiruzen said, "Now let's go, Kurenai. I'm sure the meeting will be longer than expected and quite taxing on the mind." Both Hiruzen and Kurenai vanished in a swirl of leaves. Kakashi emerges from the shadows, takes off his mask, and cautiously makes his way into Naruto's den, where he observes them sleeping. He smiles beneath his bandages, but it disappears as Naruto starts to awaken. He looks blearily at Kakashi, who was motionless because he didn't want to frighten Naruto after seeing the other ANBU's mangled bodies. But he hadn't anticipated Naruto yawning a little before his lips quirked up. There appeared to be a small smile. "It seems you've grown fond of her, Naruto." I should know who she is. Her dark blue hair is a giveaway to me that she's a Hyuga, but her name." When Kakashi heard Naruto yell the name, his eyes widened. "Nada." It sounded just like his old voice, albeit a little rough and worn out. Kakashi said, "Hinata Hyuga, that's what you're saying. But how do you know her name?" Naruto cocked his head to his left and gave Kakashi a perplexed look. Kakashi leaned back against the walls and sighed. Kakashi pulled out a small book and started reading from the last page, saying, You probably don't know either. Well, as long as you're not going to attack me, there's no point in me hiding. Besides, with that sense of smell, you'd probably find me anyway." Since Hinata would not be threatened by the book, Naruto placed his head next to hers and went back to sleep. It was almost 9 o'clock in the evening, and Heishi waited eagerly in the Hokage's office, wondering what the Hokage wanted. He wasn't feeling well, and it didn't help that an elderly person's fart had pushed it earlier. Recalling that the elder had instructed him to substitute Neji for Hinata, Heishi frowned inwardly. Although he didn't despise the boy, he wasn't going to allow his oldest daughter to be sealed. He only persuaded the elder that he believed his daughter was weak because, should he make a mistake, his position as clan head could be taken away, and all hope for Hinata would vanish along with it. Heishi was, for want of a better word, furious after learning that his daughter had fled her hospital room. He sighed inaudibly, wondering if anyone else was experiencing this pain. Heishi and the advisors were informed that someone was present by a sneeze coming from behind the door. A few seconds later, the door opened, and Heishi was taken aback to see Kurenai following the Hokage. Heishi saw the rage in her eyes when they looked at each other. He wasn't shocked, He'd given Kurenai a bad impression when he was portraying a frustrated and angry father. Everyone nodded when Hiruzen said, "Good evening and thank you for coming to the meeting. I am sorry if I have interrupted anything, but this is important." While Kaharu and Homura nodded, Heishi appeared perplexed. "Now, I'm sure by now word has spread about tonight's earlier events." He said, "I was not informed about what happened. Since it is late, I will give you the broad outline of what happened. You too should listen as well, since you were not given all the details. Heishi, it seemed that your daughter had learned of Naruto's transformation and had been taken to his cage by 2 of her classmates. There, some villagers believed that Naruto was holding her against her will, so they organized a mob to attack him. Hinata's 2 classmates left when they saw the mob gathering, but Hinata was unaware of it. After being pried from the cage, she saw that they were going to attack Naruto, but Kurenai stopped the first inebriated Chunin who was about to attack Naruto and got into a brawl. Hiruzen could swear he saw Hiashi's muscles tense and then relax after he said, Hinata then moved in front of the group of civilians just as they were about to strike Naruto, but a second Chunin pushed her away, unintentionally knocking the girl unconscious. Naruto, who at the time was motionless from a shocking the cage gave him, saw her get hurt and went into a rampage, seeing the drunken Chunin as a threat to Hinata. Well, he killed civilians and Chunin in general after that. Not even my Anbu could stop the raging boy. Because Kurenai wore the same vest as the Chunin who attacked and injured Hinata, Naruto mistook her for a threat after they were all killed. Hiashi's expression was stoic, but Hiruzen could tell he was taken aback. It was only because of Hinata that Kurenai is standing by my side right now. That, Heishi, is what happened earlier today. Kurenai nodded her head in agreement as he turned to face her. Kurenai stated, "It's true, everything that was said happened." Hiruzen turned to face his advisors and gave them a serious look. The idea to keep Naruto in a controlled environment was an excellent idea and I still agree with it. However, the method of which was used was anything but excellent. As you know, that idea backfired on us and even more of my villagers are now fertilizer. Hiruzen said with an angry voice. Kaharu asked, "Then what have you come up with, Hiruzen?" Hiruzen's smile informed everyone that he had a thought. Hiruzen allowed his words to sink into the advisor's thoughts before continuing, saying, "I feel that Naruto should be monitored and be beside someone at all times until he is capable of thinking on his own, or more human, whichever is better." Something clicked in Hiashi's mind, and he recognized the person Hiruzen was referring to. "I, unfortunately, cannot always have Naruto by my side since I am the Hokage and cannot show favoritism. However, I do know someone that can monitor him and make sure he doesn't attack anyone." When Kaharu and Homura eventually understood it, they were a little dubious about it. "I see you have figured it out, Heishi." With doubt, Kaharu questioned, "How do we know he won't attack her?" Putting air quotes around, keeper, Hiruzen stated, "If she could stop him from attacking, why would he attack her? Besides, it is not entirely my choice. I am letting Heishi decide if Hinata should or should not be Naruto's keeper." Hiashi's expression was thoughtful as he considered the circumstances. Heishi remarked, "I am not sure the elders will like this. They cannot disagree with it if it is classified as a mission. Hinata Hyuga, even though she is not one of my shinobi yet, will be given the task of watching over Naruto to ensure that he does not go on a rampage. So Heishi, since you are Hinata's father, what do you say?" Heishi breathed a sigh of relief. He would be insane to entrust his daughter with a psychotic killing machine after what he had just been told, but Naruto was no ordinary killing machine. Hiruzen nodded his head in agreement with Hiashi's statement. "I suppose that it is acceptable so long as Naruto behaves." Everyone bowed to Hiruzen as they began to leave the room after he said, "With Hinata with him I'm sure he'll be on his best behavior. Now that that's settled, you all may leave and get some rest for tomorrow is the start of a new day." He sighed with satisfaction, hoping that he wouldn't ruin Naruto's chance at happiness. Kakashi put his left hand over his mouth and gave a loud yawn. He glanced at the sleeping pair and laughed for the 10th time in the past hour. He watched the sun begin to rise outside Naruto's den. Kakashi's thoughts turned to Naruto's ancestry and how he would react if he discovered that his father had been the one who had Kyuubi implanted in him. Perhaps Naruto actually became the Kyuubi in some way. He certainly did act like it at times. However, it's unclear if Kyuubi is still sealed in him. Naruto flinched and began sniffing the air around him before encircling her with all 9 tails and embracing her. After a moment, Kakashi saw 2 more figures moving toward Naruto's cage. As the other 2 presences approached, he turned to watch Naruto play possum. Kakashi grinned. "The child has a knack for tracking, I'll keep that in mind for later." "Dog." Anbu said, donning his dog mask before leaping out of Naruto's body and landing in front of Hiruzen, where he bowed and kneeled. Kakashi asked, "Yes, Hokage Sama?" as he saw Heishi standing next to Hiruzen. Hiruzen gave the order, "Please show Heishi where his daughter is currently resting in." Kakashi nodded, got up, and walked back to the cage. "This way, Hyuga Sama." Heishi gave Hiruzen a nod, and the two of them trailed behind Kakashi, who was grinning beneath his mask. It would not be a dull morning, he thought, either because Heishi would kill Naruto or because he would have a heart attack. Heishi gave both men a strange look as Kakashi stood at the door of Naruto's den. He said, "In there," and Kakashi gave him a nod. Heishi inhaled deeply before entering the den. As he saw Naruto holding Hinata in a protective manner with his tails encircling her like a blanket, he halted a few paces short of fully entering. He also noticed that each tail had a tiny bit of red chakra surrounding it. With his fatherly instincts taking over, Heishi questioned, "What is he doing?" Kakashi responded, reverting to his slothful ways, "I assume Hyuga Sama is protecting Hinata from the chill of the night." "Well, he has been since morning, but that's not the point." Heishi raised an eyebrow at Kakashi before turning back to Hinata and Naruto. As he approached Hinata, Kakashi became alarmed. "Wait, I don't think that's..." Naruto's eyes opened and met Hiashi's before Kakashi could finish. Naruto swiftly went from hugging Hinata to leaping over her motionless form and releasing one of his tails, all the while baring his teeth. Heishi retreated to avoid being struck when the free tail made a horizontal swipe. Naruto snarled at the new invader after landing between Hinata and Heishi. Heishi continued to stare at Naruto as Kakashi warned, "I tried to tell you, Hyuga Sama. Naruto is very protective of Hinata. Ever since she was hurt yesterday, Naruto won't let anyone near her except for Hokage Sama and me for some reason." Until Hinata began to stir, they both kept staring at one another. With 8 tails wrapped around her and Naruto's growl echoing in her ears, Hinata sat up and asked, "Naruto-kun?" Her right eye was half closed and her left eye was closed as she gazed at Naruto. Naruto turned to face her and asked, "What's wrong, Naruto-kun?" before he let out a little whine. Heishi moved closer, but Naruto heard him and gave him a menacing growl, which made Heishi take another step back. Hinata looked up and saw the 3 adults when Hiruzen calmly begged, "Hinata, please call him off." She covered her face with one of Naruto's tails and blushed. She said sweetly, I'm sorry, and Naruto-kun, no, don't hurt them." Naruto lowered his body and took cautious steps back. He stopped beside Hinata and then cuddled up against her thigh, his gaze never leaving Heishi. Hinata gasped in surprise as he struggled to stay conscious, and Heishi tried to keep his temper in check, reminding himself that Naruto was not a hormonal boy but rather had the brain of a young kid. Hinata looked at the cage and then at her father. "See, Heishi, Naruto listens to Hinata without hesitation and he'll make an ideal bodyguard for her." Hinata questioned, "Father, what does he mean by that?" Hinata's eyes widened before turning to face Naruto. "I have decided, for your and the village's safety, that Naruto will follow you around at all times." With his head resting on Hinata's thigh and his eyes fixed on Heishi, he was alert but not growling. Heishi and Hiruzen nodded when Hinata questioned, As in, all the time? The thought of her crush spending every moment of her waking and sleeping life with her occupied Hinata's thoughts, and she didn't say another word. After some time, Heishi and Hiruzen noticed Hinata nodding off and exchanged strange glances. Naruto stopped Heishi and Hiruzen in their tracks as they approached the two. In an attempt to soothe Naruto, Hiruzen said, "Okay Naruto, calm down, we won't hurt Hinata." Before retreating, Heishi observed Naruto examining Hiruzen. With an inaudible sigh, Heishi approached Hinata, who was standing across from Naruto. It was better to avoid starting a fight so early in the morning, but he wasn't scared of the demon child. Hinata. This seemed to lull Hinata out of her reverie because she blushed and gave Heishi a perplexed look as soon as she did. With a slight wobble, Hinata stood and nodded, saying, "Let's go home. You still have to go to the academy today." To help her stand more steadily, Naruto used one of his tails to support her and another as a kind of arm rest. Hinata smiled shyly and said, Thank you Naruto-kun." Naruto yipped joyfully. Heishi grinned as Hinata giggled. He had never heard his daughter laugh so joyfully. Not since, at least. Heishi looked up to see Kakashi pointing to Hiruzen, who was strolling alongside Hinata and Naruto, saying, "Hyuga Sama, the others are leaving." No one is waiting for him anymore, so Heishi began to follow them, his perspiration dropping. Fearing the unknown, Hinata gazed at the closed door before her, wondering how they would react. Will they be irate, anxious, afraid, hateful, irritated, irate? Naruto whimpered and gave Hinata's leg a sideways bump. When she looked down, she saw him sitting expectantly and obediently at her side. With a smile on her face, Hinata allowed Naruto to prod her once more, assuring her that he would always be by her side. After making up her mind, Hinata looked up at the door and inhaled deeply before exhaling. Everyone in the room turned to look at Hinata and Naruto as she turned the knob and pushed the door forward. Hinata gasped as she noticed that Naruto had even more glaring holes in him and that many eyes were narrowing at her entrance. Hinata went to the table and sat down, doing her best to ignore the staring eyes. From the corner of her eye, she noticed her father wearing his typical stoic expression. She was well aware of his expectations of her. Heishi had instructed her to smuggle Naruto to her room once they arrived at the compound and wait for his command to enter the dining room so that he and Hiruzen could discuss Naruto's stay with the elders. Hinata claimed to have heard numerous irate cries of protest and glass breaking. Naturally, the yells were short-lived as the compound was filled with an incalculable amount of murderous intent that silenced everyone. When a female branch member named Yoko knocked on her door, Hinata knew it was time to accompany Naruto downstairs. The elders and some of the other adults were staring at them both as she sat on a futon and Naruto sat on his hands and knees with his upper torso up. There wasn't much she could do about it, but it wasn't exactly a great way to start the day. An elder got to his feet and glared at Naruto and Hinata more intensely, saying, "I'm sorry, but this is unacceptable." Interestingly enough, Hinata would spar with the same elder. The man, who appeared to be about to lose his temper, said calmly, "We cannot let that roam our home as if it did not murder all those people long ago. Was yesterday really that long ago?" Hinata gave the elder a look that suggested he was a fool. The only quiet thing Heishi said was, "Akio, sit down." However, the intensity and rage behind it were very clear. Akio yelled, "No, I will not sit down." At last, the man yelled, primarily at the two individuals in question, "If it wasn't bad enough, we have it guarding our heiress who can't even defend herself." Sensing the man's hatred, Naruto sank into a defensive stance and began to growl. Akio smugly asked, "Oh, what are you going to do?" And Naruto let out a loud bark that startled everyone in the room and made Hinata unconsciously grab onto Naruto's shirt collar. Hinata had a dejected, focused expression on her face when Naruto looked up. Heishi cautioned, "Do not provoke him, Akio." Akio merely snorted. Naruto snarled more loudly as red chakra began to seep out and encircle his claws. What can this brat do? He's probably only a bit stronger than Hinata, but that's not saying much. His crimson eyes shifted away from Hinata's weeping eyes and toward the elder who had brought her to tears. Naruto was only thinking about one thing, and that was that the man was going to die. With reflexes that only experienced people possess, Akio leapt back in time to see Naruto emerge in front of him and deftly lower his sharp claws. As he vanished from view, Naruto snarled in a primordial manner. Hinata observed that Akio escaped the majority of Naruto's attacks. Akio sarcastically remarked, "You'll have to do better than that foxboy. I'm not like those weak villagers." The following events were best explained by the proverb, "Be careful what you wish for." Since he would need a different strategy to deal with the threat, Naruto extended the red chakra on his arm and grabbed Akio, who wasn't prepared for Naruto to do so. With a sly smile, Naruto pulled his hand back and encircled Akio with all 9 tails, nearly encircling his entire body. When Hinata awoke from her daze, she rushed to Naruto, who was pressing down on the imprisoned elder. No Naruto.kun, D. Don't kill him. Naruto saw the expression in Hinata's eye as he looked down at her. After a brief moment of hesitation, he closed his crimson eyes and let Akio fall from the sky. Akio's face hit the hardwood floor with a hard landing. He was trying to breathe and was coughing. Astonished by Naruto's insane strength, Akio gazed at him with hatred and fear in his eyes. Hinata sobbed into Naruto's shoulder as she held him by the neck. With his fox ears down and his gaze fixed on the ground, Naruto said, Please Naruto.kun, don't kill, D. Don't kill in my name. Not for me. Please, I'm not worth it. His expression matched that of a reprimanded child. Everything about this time in his life, the things he witnessed, the words spoken, was being ingrained in Naruto's memory. For the rest of his life, he would remember this moment. Akio got to his feet, and Heishi watched the scene with a calculating eye. His face was twisted in shame and rage, but his legs were shaking. The boy has attacked me. He should be put to death, Heishi said, closing his eyes and crossing his arms over his chest. Akio scowled but said nothing more as Heishi reprimanded him, saying, I told you not to provoke him and that for the time being. He's still on edge from yesterday and any assault, whether they are physical or verbal, on Hinata or him will be ill-advised. Even with this knowledge, you still decided to act against it. There is no one to blame but yourself. As the other adults and elders watched Naruto with caution, Heishi left the thread hanging, saying, that goes to everyone else. Do not provoke the boy or you will be killed. Hinata had returned to her seat, and the demon was now sleeping next to her. Hinata guessed that the branch member's breakfast was onigiri when she came out of the kitchen with it on a plate. Her stomach was dying from starvation. Technically, she hadn't eaten since yesterday, and she blushed. The branch member was in front of Hinata when Naruto growled ferociously, causing the Hyuga to back off of Hinata. Hinata reassured him, saying, No Naruto-kun, it's okay, shush. She's not going to do anything. Hinata blushed as Naruto closed his eyes and rested his head on her thigh. After that, he rubbed his cheek against her thigh and purred contentedly, nearly knocking Hinata out. She could still laugh, though, at Naruto's cuteness and the way he touched her thigh. The women in the room marveled at the adorable scene, momentarily forgetting the earlier incident. If the one who is supposed to keep it tame blushes at the touch, how are we supposed to be protected from the demon? The males were more, scared. One Hyuga woman muttered to another, that is so cute. The other woman nodded and giggled. Getting on their wives' bad side was nearly as bad as what Akio did, so some of the other men scowled but remained silent. A girl who was a member of the Hyuga branch was also in awe of the scene. Hinata gave her a beseeching look. Hinata said, I'm sorry, he's just protective, is all. The Hyuga girl paused, then waved it away. Hinata flushed as the Hyuga girl winked and teased, don't worry about it. Besides, I understand. Boyfriends could be so overprotective sometimes. Hinata believed she heard someone coughing and nearly choking, as well as someone standing up. Hyuga Sama, however, Hinata was too preoccupied with the idea of dating Naruto. She glanced down at Naruto, who had also been given breakfast, although it appeared to have been something from the refrigerator's bottom. Even Naruto was aware that eating that slop was a bad idea. Naruto began eating one of Hinata's onigiri out of her hand like a dog after she gave it to him. As Hinata felt Naruto's moist tongue wipe the leftover rice off her hand, she burst out laughing. Hinata looked at her father and nodded dutifully as she got up and went to her room to get her bag. Hinata, it is getting late and the academy starts soon. Take your breakfast with you. You're going to need all the energy you can get. She was followed by Naruto, but not before he stole another onigiri. With his eyes closed and a smile on his face, he followed Hinata, the onigiri already being devoured by the joyful fox. Naruto looked up at her and realized he had been caught. Naruto-kun. He laughed as he sprinted past Hinata and to her second floor room. Hinata yelled, Wait Naruto-kun. As she sprinted to catch up to Naruto. He pushed open the door and hid in her room, yapping joyfully. When Hinata entered her room, Naruto was nowhere to be seen. Naruto-kun. Hinata said in a whisper as she moved slowly to the center of the room. She could hear him panting, as though he were a dog awaiting an order from his master. When Hinata heard something behind her, she spun around on her heels, but she saw nothing. Yip! Hinata exclaimed as Naruto emerged from the closet and slammed into her. As Naruto glomped her and they both collapsed onto her bed, she squealed. As Hinata watched Naruto beam down at her, she blushed and blinked several times. Hinata noticed Naruto's 9 tails wagging wildly behind him from beneath him. Gazing into Naruto's azure eyes, Hinata felt her entire world come to a halt. Then it occurred. Naruto licked her nose, causing her to lose consciousness. Hiruzen sat in his office chair and let out a long sigh. He was shocked by what he learned when he and Kakashi returned to his office after leaving the Hyuga compound so he could be debriefed. Reliving his conversation with Kakashi in his mind, Hiruzen rubbed his temples. Kakashi sat down in front of the Hokage's desk and said, Nothing much happened after you left Hokage. Sama, well except for one thing. Hiruzen asked, Well what happened? As Kakashi took off his mask, his black, weary eye fixed on Hiruzen's. Well, Naruto isn't as mindless as we first thought. A couple of minutes after you left, I was trying to remember the name of the Hyuga heiress and well, he spoke. Hiruzen looked at Kakashi with skepticism. Hiruzen reiterated, he spoke? And Kakashi gave a nod. That's right Hokage. Sama, Naruto spoke. Only one word but nonetheless it was a word, replied Kakashi. What did he say? I just asked out loud, and he replied, "Nada." He saw Hizuzen's disbelieving expression and laughed. "Yeah, I couldn't believe it either, but there's no mistaking it. The boy isn't mindless." In light of this, Hiruzen was aware that Naruto possessed the capacity for more human thought and behavior. Time was the only issue. How much time would it take Naruto to regain human? Like thinking? To act, speak, and walk like a human? He remembered hearing something that was absolutely true, and he sighed. Uncertainty is the only reliable aspect of the future. When someone knocked on his door, he stopped thinking, cleared his throat, and sat up straight. "Come in." The door opened, revealing a man standing there, restrained by his secretary. As his secretary straightened up and opened her mouth to speak, Hiruzen arched an eyebrow, but he spoke before her. His secretary nodded and went to her desk without saying anything. "Thank you, I'll take care of it from here." As the man approached the chair in front of his desk, Hiruzen observed him closely. He was dressed in green pants, black sandals, a white undershirt, and a red vest with scale patterns. It was difficult to read his black eyes. Finally, he had a sword hanging from his left hip, and his black hair was styled in a low ponytail that fell just past his shoulders. The man was sitting in his spot, as motionless as possible, and he was grinning. Hiruzen said, "How may I help you? I'm sorry, but what is your name?" And the man's smile wavered slightly. "Where are my manners? I apologize." As he leaned back in his chair, Hiruzen raised an eyebrow in curiosity. "My name, Hokage Sama, is Lance Kumazuki, and I have a proposition for you," the now identified Lance said. "Do you? If you believe the Hokage would be interested in it, then it must be something." "Well, Lance Kumazuki, what do you suggest?" Hiruzen inquired, causing Lance to smile more broadly. With the memory of her awakening still vivid in her mind, Hinata walked with Naruto at her left side, blushing. Hinata could hear faint whimpers and light snoring, and she felt something heavy on her legs. Whatever it was pretty heavy, before she sat up abruptly and snapped her eyes open, looking down at her feet and feeling blood rush to her face. Naruto was sleeping on her legs, curled up in a ball, and she felt like fainting again if she hadn't heard the door behind her open. She turned to see her cousin Neji staring at her icily before his face changed, and he rushed to Hinata's side, unexpectedly kicking Naruto off of her and bringing her up before pushing her behind him and falling into the Jiyuken stance. Hinata was too shocked by Neji's kick to hear him growling. As Neji waited for Naruto to stand, he was taken aback when one of his 9 golden tails swiftly encircled him and tightened his arms and legs. "Stay behind me, Hinata." "Sama." Neji's advice was met with deaf ears. When Hinata heard the window's glass shatter, she shook her head and watched as Naruto shook his own head and chased after Neji, who grunted before being flung to the side and heading for the window. Naruto-kun. Hinata ran out of her room and down the stairs, saw her father but said nothing to him, and ran to the front door, opening it. Almost instantly, she saw Neji fly across the yard as Naruto stalked him slowly. Hinata ran to his side and stopped Naruto from attacking Neji. "I saw Neji struggling to stand while Naruto waited patiently for him to stand," Hinata said, looking out her broken window. Naruto-kun. "No, it's okay. Stop." Since he was the one who started the attack, the demonic boy was wary of Neji. She yelled as Naruto stopped moving but continued to growl at Neji. Neji stood, unsteadily and forcefully, and walked back inside without saying anything more. Hinata was about to apologize to him when she noticed the angry expression in Neji's eyes, but before she could think, Heishi appeared at the doorway. With Naruto walking beside her and watching over her house, Hinata nodded and began to leave her front yard, saying, "Hinata, I think it is best if you head for the academy now." She let out an inaudible sigh, knowing that she had some work to do with Naruto, especially given how her life at school was going, and that if she blinked at the wrong moment, someone would be leaving in a body bag. Hinata was now staring at Naruto, who was obliviously and blissfully happy, and he was smiling back at her. He barked enthusiastically, and Hinata blushed shyly, blushing even now. She couldn't help but get down on her knees and give him a hug, something she had always wanted to do, until she thought, since when did I have the confidence to hug anyone, let alone Naruto of all people? Was it the stress that was beginning to overwhelm her, or was it the knowledge that he was merely a mindless killing machine that obeyed her without question, that he would listen to her no matter what she did? Hinata knew deep down that it was the latter, and she hugged him, unsure of how Naruto would respond if he returned to normal. He would likely push her away and stare at her as if she were crazy, but now that he was in his new state, she knew he wouldn't do that. He was simply too loyal. She let him go and got up before continuing on her journey to the academy, but then she noticed that everyone was staring at her, and she wondered why they were glaring at her. People were mumbling under their breaths and talking to each other about something, and then she realized that they were staring at her because she was with Naruto. It made sense. He was different from everyone else in every way, and his new appearance didn't help. But it was crazy to take that and hate it so much. She heard Naruto growl low as he looked around with some paranoia. With a sigh of satisfaction, Hinata arrived at the academy with everyone intact. She was anxious about reintroducing Naruto to the class, and he seemed to sense her anxiety by rubbing his head against her leg. Looking down, Hinata saw Naruto bite down on her black pants and begin to drag her toward the academy. After giving Naruto a pat on the head and taking a deep breath, Hinata walked up to the academy and down the hall, imagining how her class would react to the new Naruto. However, as she saw the door leading to her classroom, she began to second-guess herself and looked down at Naruto to gauge his response. Hinata giggled at him as she watched his eyes scan the door in front of him before looking up at her with a gleam in his eyes, blushing as she nodded her head and he nodded back with his tongue hanging from his open mouth. Naruto was clearly excited, as evidenced by the way his 9 tails were all swinging energetically and his ears twitching violently as he was animated by all the new sounds he was hearing. Iruka was sitting in his chair waiting for the school day to begin when Hinata turned the door's knob and pushed it forward. He looked up and smiled at her before his eyes widened and fell on Naruto. Unsurprised by his expression, she started to touch the tips of her index fingers together out of shy habit when he turned back to face her. The first thing the class saw after Hinata was Naruto on all fours, with his 2 golden fox ears twitching, all 9 golden tails wagging, and his deep blue eyes scanning the room as she stepped forward and entered the room, followed by Naruto. Anyo, G good morning, she said nothing in response. When Hinata heard her classmates muttering, clearly about Naruto's new appearance, she dared not look up. She turned to face Naruto and saw the joy in his eyes turn to fear and uncertainty. Hinata. Looking to her right, Hinata noticed Iruka giving Naruto a suspicious look. Is this who I think it is? Unbelieving his own eyes, he asked. Hinata blushed and blinked several times before nodding. Everyone, or at least those who didn't know, gasped when she said, Anyo, this I.isnn Naruto.kun. Sakura and Ino were staring at Naruto, still in awe of his new appearance but not shocked. A child in the rear yelled, "This is a joke, it has to be." Naruto gave a small whine and stepped behind Hinata before it escalated into a growl. Akira, don't say anything. Iruka reprimanded. He walked to the front of the class and stood in front of Naruto and Hinata, looking between the two of them, both nervous but alert. It has to be though, said a new voice, one that Hinata knew belonged to Kiba. Naruto's growling grew more intense, and he was unsure of what to call the unidentified child, threat or not. He looks ridiculous. Kiba touched Naruto's ear, but he quickly pulled away for 2 reasons. First, it felt too real to be fake, and second, he wanted to keep his hand on his wrist. Still unsure of what to do, Naruto reacted instinctively and attempted to bite the hand, but he was too slow. Hinata hugged him with a dark blush to stop Naruto from attacking Kiba. Hinata gave the order, N. No Naruto.kun, D. Don't attack anyone. Naruto cuddled up to her neck, watching Kiba closely. Hinata's blush darkened even more, which nobody believed was possible, and Naruto purred softly. Hinata. Sakura and Ino stood up from their seats as Hinata squeaked at the mention of her name. I'm glad you and Naruto are okay, but what happened after we left? When everyone, including Iruka, stared at the 4 in shock, Ino asked, and Hinata squirmed beneath her tan sweater. Ino, what do you mean? After getting sufficiently far away from Naruto, Kiba inquired. She is referring to the fact that Ino and I took Hinata to see Naruto after we noticed him in a cage yesterday. After Sakura responded, everyone turned to face Hinata, who wished she could vanish from view. Then people began to crowd the cage and they took me and Ino away, but we don't know what happened after that. So, will you give an explanation? Kiba asked somewhat firmly, causing Naruto to glare at him. Kiba, P. Please calm down or Naruto.kun W. will attack again, warned Hinata. Now, Kiba, return to your seat. Iruka gave the order, and Kiba obeyed it while muttering to himself. Hinata, if you want to, we'd all like to hear what happened. Hinata wasn't expecting an answer, but she was happy that Iruka was giving her the chance to back out of the blatantly awkward story. Everyone turned to face Naruto, who was still cuddling Hinata's neck and grinning cheekily, just like his former self, as he said, Nata, save, Fox. NN Naruto. K.kun, are you able to speak? Every girl in the room squealed, forgetting that Naruto of all people was the reason behind their squeal. Hinata eyed the entire classroom and unconsciously tightened her grip on Naruto as he tilted his head to the side, his fox ears twitching wildly along with his tails. Iruka said, "Hinata, before Naruto gets glomped by every girl here, please explain what happened." This made Hinata anxious once more. Should she fabricate a story about Naruto killing a quarter of the civilian population, or should she tell them the truth? She turned to Naruto, who gave her a cautious but otherwise relaxed look in return. Well, Anyo, after Aino and Sakura left, I.S. stayed to help end Naruto-kun from being attacked from the versus villagers and, she said. She didn't completely lie, but she did omit a part when she said, I was knocked unconscious by a drunk villager, and when I woke up, my father, Hokage Sama, and an Anbu were watching as Naruto-kun protected me while I slept. I understand. Iruka commanded. Well, now that that's over, please go back to your regular seats, but Hinata hesitated. Iruka nodded, although she looked doubtful. Actually Iruka. Sensei, Naruto-kun is supposed to be around me at all times. The girls seated near the edge of the desks were desperately trying not to reach out and pet Naruto's adorable ears and tails, but when Hinata sat down on her seat, Naruto lay comfortably beside her feet, again making her blush when he cuddled her leg. Sure. Hinata grinned as she went to sit in her seat, Naruto following her, his golden tails wagging happily behind him. As Hinata's left hand reached down and began to play with Naruto's ear, she drowned out Iruka's voice. Okay, let's start off the day with a review of the substitution jutsu. He purred silently at the sensation of her gentle hand on his ear, and she suppressed a giggle when he moved his head around her hand, forcing her to scratch his head. Naruto, who is who he is now and was before his transformation, became restless a few minutes into class. He crawled around Hinata's chair and ended up tickling her whenever one of his tails rubbed against her bare legs. Hinata was able to contain a few giggles, but some were able to get past her defenses. Iruka pretended not to hear her. He was still relieved that Naruto was alive or anything, but given how everyone had acted earlier, it was obvious that the news would reach their parents and chaos would ensue. At least for the Hokage and the academy. While Hinata listened to Iruka's lecture, Naruto sighed and rested his chin on top of her left foot. He glanced around the room and saw that at least half of the women were staring at him. He smiled at some, but he was curious as to why some blushed and turned away, and he was pleased when others returned the smile. Not only did he see this, but Hinata did too, and although her gentle disposition kept her from being cruel, she was flushed on the inside, and even then, her worst fear was that at least one girl would fall and ruin her outfit. Hinata even felt a chill go down her spine at how innocent she was. Hinata and Naruto were the first to leave the classroom when the lunch bell rang, and Iruka had to blink a few times before Hinata's actions became clear to him. Naruto, who didn't really know what was happening, in fact, he didn't care. Just that Hinata was close was all that mattered to him as he waited for her to catch her breath outside the academy. When Hinata finally caught her breath, she turned to face Naruto, who was grinning broadly and watching his tails wag. Hinata laughed when his smile vanished and he focused solely on the tails behind him, as though they were the most fascinating thing in the world and he and his tails were the only things there were. His head was moving deftly to the left and right, trying to keep his gaze on them. When Naruto began chasing his tails, Hinata's laughter intensified. He turned around clockwise and counterclockwise at one point, then jumped up but missed and fell on his back. Hinata's giggles diverted Naruto's attention from his tails, and he grinned and began to circle her like a ravenous predator while she was unaware of his movements. His gaze stayed fixed on Hinata as her bursts of laughter began to subside, and she noticed Naruto eyeing her, blushing at the intensity of his gaze. Naruto-kun. When his name was called, Naruto knelt down and lunged at Hinata. Sakura wandered around the academy, thinking mostly about Naruto and Hinata. She was relieved that both were alright after what had happened the day before, but she was very interested in learning why Naruto had undergone the strange transformation. Sakura chose to follow it after gasping and searching for the person who had yelled at her, but she wanted to leave after realizing why. Naruto-kun. No. After being tickled by all 9 of Naruto's tails and realizing that Hinata had no way out of her position, Sakura slipped away without the two noticing, and Hinata said this in between giggles. With her back to the wall, she recalled the picture and grinned, pleased for Hinata, who, for as long as she had known the bashful girl, Sakura had known always liked Naruto, and now he was only interested in her. If Sakura had been honest with herself, she would have acknowledged that she was envious that Hinata had Naruto's full attention, but she dismissed the strange emotion as her sixth sense, before the thought could truly sink in. Sakura's sixth sense had not been as active as it had been a year ago, but each member of the honorary Sasuke fan club developed their own sixth sense. That told them when Sasuke needed their attention immediately, as anyone would boast about. But her inner fangirl had managed to classify it as a strange phenomenon that should be ignored for the time being. Returning to Hinata and Naruto, Naruto had stopped right away after causing her to cry and was whimpering softly as he waited for Hinata to gather herself. He had used his tails to wipe away her tears and then waited patiently next to her. When Hinata finally calmed down, she sat up and turned to face Naruto, but she was taken aback to see him sitting beside her with a serious expression. She wondered why he wasn't as joyful as he had been a minute before. It actually made her think of a pet that knew it had done something wrong and was awaiting punishment. She blinked several times as she considered the situation. Was he waiting for punishment? By whom and for what purpose? Naruto.kun. Still not sure what exactly made Naruto somber, she saw him flinch and give her a nervous look. It's okay, she said, wanting to see him smile again, if only for her own gratification. To Hinata's delight, Naruto smiled brightly, though not as brightly as when he was tickling her, because he was not one to hide a smile, either now or before his transformation. She assumed he felt bad about whatever he believed he had done. As they walked back to class, Naruto was jumping around Hinata to get her lunch because she didn't really want to deal with questions from her classmates, so she decided to get her lunch after everyone had left. Come on Naruto.kun. I brought my lunch, it's cinnamon buns. Naruto's somber mood vanished like a drop of water on a burning skillet, and his usual giant smile returned. Hinata opened the door and looked around, but there was nobody there, so she crept inside and went to her desk where she had her lunch. She may have been obsessed with cinnamon and insisted on eating it hidden so no one would ask for it, but she was willing to share if the person was with Naruto. Hinata retrieved her lunch, hurried back to Naruto in the hallway, and walked out to a picnic table directly outside the academy, noticing as she went that Naruto was staring at her lunch as though it would vanish if he looked away. When Hinata finally arrived at the picnic table, she snapped her fingers and placed her lunch on it. Naruto then leapt onto the table and began sniffing the bag. Hinata jogged quickly to the academy, and Naruto would have followed. I'm coming back Naruto.kun. Have to get something. Stay Naruto.kun, unless it was for that. While waiting for Hinata, Naruto kept his eyes on Hinata's lunch, and when he heard footsteps approaching, his ears perked up. When he looked up, he saw 4 older-looking students approaching him, and they surrounded him. He looked around nonchalantly, his tails still moving languidly to the left and right, and he couldn't help but snarl in warning when he saw their smirks. The boy on the left said, I always knew you were weird Uzumaki, but this is taking it to an extreme. The other 3 agreed, and Naruto glared at them before being knocked down by a person who leapt on him from behind. Naruto moaned as he felt the heavier child prevent him from rising. One of the 4 children gave Naruto a high five while the others giggled. As the 4 children returned their focus to Naruto, the older child nodded and said, Good job, Haruko. What's this? Naruto barked as he used one of his tails to easily push Haruko off him and get into a defensive position. The kidnapping ringleader laughed and snatched Hinata's lunch. The person next to Guro said, Hey, Guro, it looks like he wants to fight. Guro nodded as he gave the other 3 Hinata's lunch, and they began to snatch at the food. Guro approached Naruto, who was ready to stab him with any of his many tails, but just before he could, he remembered Hinata's words and relaxed his tail, instead running past Guro, who was alarmed by Naruto's speed. As the 3 pulled out a cinnamon bun, Naruto materialized in front of them, swiftly retrieved them and Hinata's lunch with his tails, and dashed into the academy as Hinata emerged, blinking as he zipped past her before turning to face him and seeing him head for the classroom. Hinata pursued him and noticed him staring at the doorway like a guard dog. Naruto.kun. When Hinata approached him, Naruto smiled and relaxed, asking, Why are you here? Naruto didn't respond to her question, and Hinata forgot that he was mute. At least not very much. She sat in her chair and pulled out 2 cinnamon buns, one for herself and one for Naruto, who ate the entire bun. He puffed out his cheeks, crossed his eyes, and tried to look at his nose, which somehow had some of the cinnamon bun on it. Hinata laughed as Naruto swallowed the entire cinnamon bun and attempted to lick the cinnamon off his nose, which only made her laugh louder. She dug into her pockets, pulled out some napkins she had taken from the cafeteria, and used one to wipe the cinnamon off his nose. Naruto then threw his head back and sneezed, which caused his body to move back and fall off the desk. As she assisted Naruto in standing, Hinata grinned. As she said, "Bless you, Naruto-kun." Naruto yipped and pleaded for another cinnamon bun, which Hinata gladly gave him. This time, he chewed the bun while sitting happily beside Hinata and purred when she used her gentle hands to scratch his ears. Her smile widened as she relished her lunch with Naruto. "So, how do you feel about Naruto's recent appearance? It must have really bothered Choji if he wasn't eating while talking." Shikamaru moaned as he opened one eye and glanced at Choji, who oddly didn't have his lunch on hand. Shikamaru surmised that this was simply so he could speak to Shikamaru without becoming sidetracked. Shikamaru closed his eyes and attempted to fall back asleep, saying, "It's troublesome." When he turned to see Kiba approaching them, Choji said, "It's fake. It's obviously a prank, but what the idiot doesn't know is that I'm not falling for it." Kiba shook his head when Choji said, "Kiba, I don't think it's a prank, it honestly looks like he's changed." "Looks like you fell for it." Shikamaru sat up, groaning. "I concur with Choji that Naruto lacks the intelligence to pull a practical joke this far. With the exception of the time he attempted to end school early while posing as Mizuki Sensei, he never really included himself in his pranks." Kiba raised an eyebrow, saying, "His transformation was the only thing wrong with his prank, it was garbage." "All right. So, how would he manage to pull this off if he couldn't pull off that prank?" Shikamaru descended and began observing the clouds. Kiba considered it for a moment before chuckling. "Whatever," Kiba said, crossing his arms, "I still think he's faking." "Where is Akamaru?" Kiba went pale when Shikamaru asked. "Akamaru." Shikamaru grinned as Kiba ran around the academy in search of his now lost dog. "Thank Kami." With his fist clenched tightly and his gritted teeth bared, Sasuke walked around to the back of the academy, hoping to avoid his fangirls and everyone else. He thought about his brother and the hatred that boiled inside of him. He muttered, "Itachi," as he stood in front of the door that led back to the academy. He pushed it open and proceeded down the empty hallways with their many doors. He saw a few students through the window of the door, and he sneered when the girls would swoon over him every time they saw him. Naruto-kun. When he saw Hinata running after Naruto with a worried expression, Sasuke's left eyebrow went up. Looking up the hall, Sasuke saw Naruto explode out of their classroom and run towards Sasuke's direction with something in his mouth. Naruto-kun. That isn't yours. As Naruto walked past him without a second thought and proceeded to the back door, Sasuke heard her yell. Hinata gave him a brief hello before pursuing him, and Sasuke watched her go through the door while hearing a lot of shocked shouts. "You know what a fool Sasuke-kun is?" Sasuke winced and lowered his head. He had been located. "Who?" Sasuke tucked his hands in his pockets and turned casually, giving Ino a blank look that she took as a sign that he wasn't particularly interested in what she had to say. "Who else? He's just doing this to take your spotlight," she said, placing her left hand on her hip and her entire weight on her left leg. "Naruto, of course." It seems that Ino didn't hear Sasuke say to himself, "I wouldn't mind that. I will always love you, Sasuke-kun, so don't worry." When Ino blew a kiss at him, Sasuke saw it come quickly and rushing towards him. He glared down at the kiss, and Ino watched it fall to the ground. Without saying anything else, Sasuke left Ino to lament her failed attempt to kiss him. Naruto. Sasuke pushed aside the front door and strode out into the front of the academy, his bangs concealing his eyes in the shadows as he wandered aimlessly through the space, staring at the tiled floor. "What are you?" Watching the bug on his right index finger move across it, Shino chose to study the bugs that lived in the partially wooded area behind the academy rather than eat lunch. Naruto-kun. That isn't yours. From under his glasses, Shino's eyes followed Naruto as he ran and hid behind a bush. Hinata, who wasn't too far from Naruto to begin with, saw him head for the bush and was now standing in front of it. Shino looked up to see Hinata run out of the academy and after Naruto, who ran in between a couple of girls, causing them to yell in surprise. When he saw 4 of Naruto's tails wagging over the bush, Shino grinned, and he heard Hinata laughing as she reached inside the bush and used her hands to grab the sides of Naruto's face in order to pull out his head. Naruto-kun, that's not why. Yours, G. Give it back. Naruto exited the bushes and moved to the left side of the academy, his ears now down instead of up. As Hinata trailed behind Naruto, Shino kept watching him. Shino wasn't sure how to react to Naruto and his new look at first because he wasn't sure how dangerous it could be, but after seeing what he had just witnessed, Shino knew better. Naruto would stay the same regardless of whether his new appearance made him resemble a young kid or a dragon with 10 heads. Shino was relieved that he wasn't a 10-headed dragon, but it wouldn't have been good because he would have likely been 10 times as loud. "Shoji, how about you?" When he heard Shikamaru ask him that, Shoji blinked. He hadn't anticipated that. "What? How do you feel about Naruto's transformation?" Shikamaru inquired, and Shoji kept blinking. "I'm not sure. I suppose his appearance was the only significant change." Shikamaru grinned and said, "From what I've seen, he's still the same Naruto that we knew before, but not as loud." Shoji nodded and laughed, and not that troublesome. "See. Shoji." When Shikamaru and Shoji looked up, they saw Hinata with her hands behind her back and Naruto staring at them from behind her while holding what appeared to be a white bag in his mouth. Shoji recognized this scene quite well. "What is he doing with my lunch, I wonder?" Shikamaru flinched as Shoji asked without displaying any emotion. Regardless of how monotonous Shoji's voice sounded, he would become irate when it came to his food being in someone else's hands who wasn't bringing it to him. Hinata said, Anyo, that's the thing, He took and ate some. Naruto then placed Shoji's lunch in front of Shoji before vanishing from view. Naruto.kun. Shikamaru read his best friend's body language to gauge his mental state. But Shoji stayed motionless as Hinata went to fetch Naruto and he stared at his lunch in disbelief. "Nay, Shoji, are you okay?" Shoji began to shake and clench his fists. Shikamaru closed his eyes and sighed, saying to himself, "That poor kid, he's going to pay for that." Hinata submerged her whole head, allowing her face and hair to soak, then surfaced and inhaled deeply after a moment. Hinata was relieved that Naruto had swimming trunks because she would have definitely fainted by now if he hadn't been swimming joyfully around the hot springs in the back of her house. Naruto confronted Shoji and then hid under Hinata's desk in the classroom, where no one knew he was there until lunchtime. After lunch, everything was as it had been before lunch, with the exception of Shoji occasionally glaring at Naruto, but Hinata knew it wasn't genuine hostility and hoped he would move on quickly. She laughed when Naruto sprayed her face with water. Naruto.kun. Yes. When Naruto dove under, but his 9 tails stayed above the water, giving him the appearance of 9 distinct gold sharks, Hinata laughed once more. She saw them move swiftly around the large hot spring before emerging in front of her, where he leapt up and grinned at her. When Hinata looked up, she saw the branch member from earlier in the day patiently waiting with shampoo. "Hinata. Sama," she said, "should we start cleaning?" When she asked, Hinata nodded, and Naruto, sensing a disruption in the force, went to the other side of the hot springs and popped his head out of the water. The branch member nodded when Hinata said, I think he knows. Naruto.kun. Before returning to the water and remaining there for a considerable amount of time, Naruto glanced at Hinata and behind him. 5 minutes later, the branch member crossed to the opposite side of the hot springs and raised Naruto out of the water using one of his tails. Yes. After the branch member finished cleaning Naruto's hair and fur, she took a loofah sponge and a bar of soap and began cleaning the exposed parts of Naruto's body. When she was done, she gently put him back in the water and left the hot springs bathroom. Naruto panicked as he tried to free himself from the Hyuga's grasp, but it was unsuccessful. Naruto went limp when the branch member applied the shampoo to his head and tails. Hinata laughed at his expression and he gave her a deadpan look. Naruto was nearly completely submerged. The only thing the giggling Hinata could see was everything above his eyes, and his tails were underwater. As his giggles subsided, his ears twitched and his tails sprang up, and when his head went underwater and he reached for the shampoo near the hot spring's edge, his tails moved once more, and Hinata became alarmed. Hinata leapt out of the water wearing her one-piece indigo bathing suit, and Naruto turned his head to the side and bit down on the shampoo before turning to face her and returning to the water. No, Naruto.kun. I'm already circa clean. Not expecting Hinata to duck, Naruto leapt into the air and looked down at the girl beneath him. RGH. Naruto slid through the room until he struck a wall, soaking the floor beneath him. Naruto.kun. With caution to avoid slipping on the slick surface, Hinata ran to him, squatting down to place his head on her lap while his arms were spread out by his side and his legs and tails pressed against the wall. Hinata noticed a silly smile and swirls in his eyes as she looked at his face. Hinata smiled and said, "Oh, Naruto.kun." When Hinata heard Naruto walk to the window and gaze out of it, she jumped on her bed and pulled her covers over her body and just barely over her face. He was staring up at the moon, and nothing moved. Hinata had never seen him so motionless. Haishi was about to leave when Hinata's voice interrupted him as the door to her room opened, and Hinata and Naruto turned to see him peeking in. Hishi paused before closing the door and said, "Good night, father." It seemed that Naruto always knew what was bothering her and what to do to make her feel better. He said, "Good night," and shut the door. Hinata turned to her left side and closed her eyes. She sniffed, and a single tear fell from her left eye. She gasped when she felt something gently fall on her shoulder, but she relaxed when she realized it was just Naruto's head. His azure eyes stared intently at her, and she returned the faint smile by feeling his 9 tails wrap around her. When he fell asleep, Hinata giggled softly and began to snore softly, so she turned to her left side and faced him. She accidentally woke him up, but he only fell back asleep when he saw her shyly put her right arm over him in an embrace. She blushed several shades of red at the touch, but Naruto's smile only prompted her to do it. Naruto's head was now over Hinata, and from a different angle, Hinata knew it would appear as though he was shielding her, so she let out a cry of, "Eep." To her astonishment, however, she didn't mind. In fact, Hinata had a feeling that she would sleep well, confident that Naruto would shield her from her night terrors. Hinata moaned as something tapped her shoulder, and as she was about to fall back asleep, she heard whining and felt another tap on her shoulder. She sat up slowly, rubbed her left eye, and then used her right lavender eye to look around for the source of the whining. Her eyes first fell on the clock on her nightstand, which showed that it was 2 in the morning. She then resumed her search for the source, which was quickly found because the source was sleeping next to her. "Naruto-kun," she said, still half asleep, seeing Naruto's face contorted in anger, then pain, and then realizing that he was having a nightmare. "Naruto-kun." His brow was furrowed, tears were streaming from his eyes, and he was biting his bottom lip until his fangs were piercing the flesh and drawing blood. "Naruto-kun." She spoke louder, but not loud enough to wake up the others who were still asleep. Naruto opened his eyes and looked around quickly, as though he had forgotten something crucial. His gaze met Hinata's, and he approached her. As soon as possible, Hinata put her head on top of Naruto's and embraced him. His 9 tails coiled around them, and Hinata could feel him trembling, not from cold, but from fear. When he continued to whine, she rocked him back and forth and whispered into his ear, "It's okay, Naruto-kun, it's okay." She recalled feeling better after her mother had done the same to her, as her shaking gradually stopped and his whining turned to silent tears. Hinata was running her fingers through his hair, recalling how her mother had done the same to her. He made his tails pull Hinata closer, causing his head to go right under her chin. She giggled and began to play with his ears, rubbing the soft, furry ears between her small fingers, and she giggled even more when one of Naruto's tails began to move. After what she estimated to be 10 minutes, Naruto fell asleep once more. Before long, Hinata began to succumb to the enchantment of sleep once more, and the last thing she saw before falling asleep was the moonlight entering her room and lighting the drawer nearest the window, specifically the bottom drawer. She grinned at the contents of the drawer and allowed sleep to take over. After a year, as she dashed through the academy's hallways and into her classroom, Hinata burst out laughing. She dashed into a tiny closet, barely large enough to conceal herself, and shut the door entirely, without pausing. She made an effort to control her laughter, but she was simply too joyful to keep it to herself. As she heard Naruto's distinctive sniffing sound, she put both hands over her mouth in a final attempt to hide her laughter. Even though she never won at hide and seek, she still enjoyed playing with him. Even though his nose was on par with, or perhaps even better than, that of an Inuzuka, it was still entertaining. Naruto's attempt to open the closet door was audible to her. She laughed. Although he had gained a lot of knowledge over the past year, the young fox demon still had trouble with doors. Naruto's attempts to open the closet door abruptly became desperate as he heard Hinata giggling from outside. As Hinata's laughter grew louder, he joyfully yipped. When he saw the door open and a beaming Hinata emerge, he quickly waggled his 9 tails behind him and said, "Hold on, Naruto-kun." Hinata blushed and giggled as Naruto yipped, "Nata, fox find Nata." As she stroked Naruto's head, she sighed and reflected on the previous year. Although the progress was gradual and occasionally discouraging, she had been successful in teaching Naruto to speak. He wouldn't even use pronouns like me or I, let alone call himself Naruto. Hinata didn't mind that he always called himself Fox, but she questioned why he didn't want to use his own name. The sensation of Naruto licking her hand snapped her out of her reverie. The sensation of his tongue on the back of her hand made her laugh. She began to move toward her desk while giggling. She arranged her lunch on her desk after taking it out. Naruto leapt beside the lunch and gazed at it curiously. "Miso ramen?" Naruto's body tensed up and his 9 tails began to wag once more as soon as he heard these words. The miso ramen was still steaming when Hinata pulled out a container, removed the lid, and set it in front of Naruto. Naruto immediately stuffed his face into the container and began consuming its contents. Hinata started eating her rice balls after getting her own lunch out. Once more, she was overcome by her thoughts and lost in the recollections of the past. Hanabi jumped at Naruto as he suddenly appeared next to her after Naruto leapt up on top of the Hyuga compound and landed next to her. As she struggled to breathe again, he gave her a joyful yap. He ran around the front yard while she glared at him. She shouted, "Naruto!" and Naruto leapt to his feet, circling Hanabi as he attempted to strike him. He believed they were playing, so he used one of his tails to gently push her back when she attempted to punch him again. This went on for a while before Hanabi became weary and sat down, panting and out of breath. Still, Naruto jumped around the weary Hyuga girl with a bounce in his step. With a distant expression in her eyes, Hanabi said, "Leave me alone, Naruto, you're making me dizzy." She collapsed onto her back. Naruto licked her cheek while hovering over her. Hanabi cried out, "I'm too dizzy, leave me alone." Hinata. Chan. A minute later, Hinata emerged outside and discovered Naruto bouncing all over Hanabi. Hinata said, What's wrong, Hanabi?" Hanabi attempted to gesture at Naruto, but he was moving too quickly, so she simply let her hand rest next to her. Hinata turned to face Naruto as she said, "He's annoying me again." Hinata said, "Naruto-kun, come on, you can help me bake." Naruto gave a joyful yap once more before trailing behind Hinata. Naruto ran up to the oven as soon as he entered the kitchen and began to bark at it. As she and Naruto watched the soft, pale dough slowly rise and turn golden, Hinata grinned while crouching in front of the oven. Naruto stumbled to say, What Nata B, and Hinata laughed at his effort. Naruto gave Hinata a forceful nod when she said, "I'm baking biscuits, Naruto-kun. Do you want to try some when they're ready?" When Hinata heard the timer go off, she got up and put on her oven mitts after waiting for 30 minutes. Naruto used 2 tails to grab the tray and 1 tail to open the oven because he was so eager to eat some of the biscuits. Hinata yelled, "Naruto-kun, wait!" But a 4th tail emerged and threw a biscuit into Naruto's mouth. Ignorant of his burning tails, he smiled as he chewed on it. "Naruto-kun, your tails." Naruto yelled in agony, dropped the biscuits, and licked his tails after glancing at them. He whimpered as Hinata held him close and asked, "Are you okay, Naruto-kun?" Hinata exclaimed as her leg came into contact with the blazing tray. Naruto opened his mouth and snarled at the tray as one of his tails pushed it to the far corner of the room. When Hinata noticed chakra beginning to form around Naruto's mouth and condense into a tiny red ball, her eyes widened. An explosion shook the Hyuga compound as he released it from his mouth and struck the tray. Several Hyugas, including Heishi, Neji, and a panting Hanabi, opened their mouths in shock and some even sobbed when they saw how their food haven had been destroyed. Glancing around, Heishi noticed a huge, dusty ball of fur in the room's corner. He approached the ball of fluff slowly, but he stopped when it opened to reveal a safe Naruto and Hinata, both of them with wide eyes, chewing on a burnt biscuit. Naruto yipped with his mouth full of burnt biscuits as she said, I don't think you should come back in here again, Naruto-kun. Naruto gave Hinata an odd look as she giggled at the memory. Hinata grinned at Naruto and shook her head, asking, "What wrong, Nata?" "Nata no nom nom." She took another bite of the rice ball and said, "I'm fine, Naruto-kun." She swallowed the rice ball and said, "See?" Naruto grinned broadly and nodded. He exclaimed, "K, Nata," and Hinata laughed once more before biting into it again. When Naruto licked her cheek, Hinata looked up and blushed. "Nata," she said. As she laughed, Naruto grinned broadly and carried on eating his ramen. As he ate and let out a sorrowful sigh, she gazed at him. Before choosing to pet Naruto's head, she reflected, "If only you had behaved like this with me before you changed Naruto-kun. But at least we're closer now than we were." Naruto opened his eyes and surveyed Hinata's room slowly. He was certain that it was night, but he wasn't entirely sure what time it was. He sat in front of the window after carefully releasing himself from Hinata's hold without waking her. He grinned drowsily as he gazed at the moon, which made him think of Hinata. "Nata," he interrupted. He gave Hinata's sleeping form a loving smile as he looked back. He began to perspire profusely as he crawled back beside Hinata. His head was inches from Hinata's face, resting on his arms as he lay fully on the ground. He opened his mouth to say, "Fox," but then stopped. Even though he may know more words now than he did a year ago, he occasionally became confused. "Fox, L. Like Nada," he said, observing Hinata's continued lack of awareness of reality. Naruto asked her, "Nada like Fox?" and wasn't shocked when she didn't respond. He hoped that one night, perhaps soon, she would wake up and hear him after he had been doing this for the past 5. Perhaps even respond. Naruto turned to the other side as Hinata groaned, causing her ears to twitch. Naruto let out a sorrowful sigh as his ears fell flat against his skull. He stood up and left Hinata's room, opening the door with one tail and closing it after himself. As he descended the stairs and entered the kitchen, he paused and turned back, recalling the last time he had gone into the space. Ignoring the occasional Hyuga that passed by sleepwalking, he moved through the different hallways. He eventually arrived at a door with multiple warnings, including, "Do not enter," "Restricted area," and so forth. Naruto opened the door and shut it behind him, largely because he didn't understand the signs. After glancing around, he leapt onto the couch that was 10 feet from a huge television. The only reason this room was restricted was that Heishi used it as his private space, where he would either watch TV with his daughters or unwind as the head of the clan. When the door was closed, the room was sealed off to prevent any noise from entering or leaving and to prevent the Byakugan from penetrating. Naruto simply enjoyed watching TV in the middle of the night, especially when he was having trouble falling asleep, and he was unaware of this or cared about it. Naruto found a few snacks between the couch's cushions while searching for the control. He set up a little toy that was most likely Hanabi's. After giving it a thorough inspection, Naruto swung his tail idly away. The small fire truck slid close to the door and collided with the floor as a result. Naruto finally located the control, pressed the large red button, and grinned as the TV came on. When he first saw a man and a woman sharing a kiss, he cocked his head to the left. The man waking up from his dream was the next thing that appeared. Before another image appeared, Naruto was going to haphazardly press the control's buttons, but he stopped when he heard the TV talking. Naruto sat on the couch like a pet waiting for a treat, and his ears perked up as he asked, "Tired of being alone? Want to share your life with the one you love? Here are some actions you can take to express your love and affection to the person you care about. For the bold, just tell them you love them," the man said, and Naruto's eyes widened as he witnessed a man approach a girl and declare his love for her. 2 scenarios were shown. One in which the girl blushed and kissed him back, and the other in which she told him in a humiliating way that she was flattering but uninterested. The man went on, and Naruto nodded, saying, "It's not always going to work out, but you can always hope for the best. You could also try getting to know her. Spend a lot of time with her. Get her to know you while you know her," Naruto said, tilting his head once in confusion at the man in the amusing white suit. "Try to hint that you like her without coming across as foolish or overt." Naruto nodded wisely, at last realizing. As he turned off the TV and went upstairs to sleep, Naruto grinned broadly and said, "Give her flowers, give her candy, give her something she really likes, be there for her when she needs you, do anything you have to just to show her you care. He would need his energy tomorrow." Give her flowers on the way to the academy the following day. Naruto, who still remembered scaring the guy half to death after barking at him, yawned as he walked beside Hinata. He hadn't slept well because 10 minutes after he had entered her room, some Hyuga had come in to inform her that she needed to wake up. Naruto grinned as he recalled what he had learned an hour or 2 earlier. Before crossing the street and following the man, Naruto stopped abruptly when he noticed a large man carrying flowers on the other side of the street. His eyes glistened as he saw the variety of colors in the bouquet. It wasn't until she turned the corner that Hinata realized she was alone, and she turned around to see Naruto turn another corner after a man holding flowers. Hinata hadn't noticed that Naruto had stopped walking with her mind too preoccupied with wondering why Naruto was acting so strangely. Naruto.kun. Hinata chased after him, but she stopped when she heard something after crossing the street. "Hey, return." As Naruto ran toward her with flowers in his mouth, she started to perspire. He stopped in front of her, and behind him, his 9 tails waved joyfully and energetically. He dropped the flowers in front of her, and Hinata blinked. "F. For me?" Hinata picked them up and admired them for a moment, but only because the man from whom Naruto had stolen the flowers returned and was as big as an Akamichi after using their trademark jutsu. To say that he was a little intimidating would be equivalent to saying that Naruto only occasionally enjoyed ramen. She stammered, and Naruto nodded. "Hey." As the giant glared at them, Hinata and Naruto tensed. Naruto began to run, using one of his tails to pick Hinata up, and he used his agility to avoid getting caught by the large, menacing man and to avoid running into other people. I could just thanks to Naruto.kun. I could just return the flowers to the M.Man. Naruto halted and set Hinata down after she yelled, and they waited for the large man to arrive. When he did, Hinata blushed and returned the flowers to him. Hinata stammered, I'm sorry. The man gave her a suspicious look and turned to leave. Hinata sighed and turned to face Naruto, who was grinning sheepishly at the ground. Hinata said, come on Naruto.kun, we don't want to be late. Naruto followed her, his head drooping in shame. Give her candy later. As they made their way home, Naruto walked beside Hinata. The academy was as dull as usual, and he had to hold back from yawning again or his jaw would clench and lock itself. His brows were furrowed as he looked up at Hinata. His first plan had failed miserably, but at least he had 4 more things he could try. In an attempt to concentrate on the task at hand, Naruto shook his head and began sniffing the air, drooling when he detected the delicious smell of ramen. At the moment, he was searching for any indications of candy or something similar. When his gaze finally found something, he dashed across the street, once more abandoning Hinata to her thoughts. Hinata said, why did Naruto steal those flowers? It doesn't make any sense. Maybe I should ask him. She turned to her right, but he wasn't there, and then to her left, but he wasn't there either. She did a 180, but he wasn't close to her, and she took a deep breath before making a 1-hand sign. As she used her Kekkei Genkai to find her charge and best friend /not secret crush, she said, Byakugan. She smiled when she saw him across the street, but then she wondered why he was in the trash can, so she rushed over to him as people began to swarm him, wondering why the demon pet was in a trash can. Naruto.kun. When Naruto yipped joyfully, Hinata's perspiration fell along with everyone else's, and she laughed uneasily as she pulled Naruto away from the throng. Naruto smiled at her and stuck his head out of the trash, then jumped out and gave her a half-eaten, half-dirty, hairy lollipop. As Hinata quickly pushed him home to finally put an end to this strange day, Naruto raised an eyebrow and scowled, Thanks but no thanks and Naruto.kun. His frown was saddened by the expression on Hinata's face. Thus far, he was failing miserably. He had roughly 4 more options to try, but was he prepared to make a mistake once more? Assign her something she truly enjoys later. Hinata was taking care of her garden, which she loved, and the thought of doing so always made her day more peaceful. She looked to her left and grinned at Naruto, who was sitting next to her, but she didn't notice the bored look on his face. Naruto was bored and wanted to do something exciting as soon as possible, so he didn't even bat an eye when a butterfly flew past his face. In his place, Naruto noticed movement out of the corner of his eye and picked up his head to see that it was a black, fluffy rabbit. Since Hinata always enjoyed cuddling with his tail, he reasoned that she must like all things fluffy. Naruto sprang to his feet and ran faster than Hinata could react, breaking through the Hyuga compound and out onto the sidewalk where he saw the rabbit fleeing. He pursued it, and the moment it realized it was being followed, it accelerated. When she finally passed the gate of the Hyuga compound, Hinata was wondering why Naruto was acting so strange and why she had to run after him all day. She looked around and saw that the standing guards were also perplexed, but they were pointing to the left, so she bowed and said a silent, thanks, before running in that direction. Naruto.kun, not again. Byakugan. Although she hadn't initially seen Naruto, she kept seeing 2 blurs pass in front of her eyes. One was small and black, and the other was a little larger and had 9 swishing tails. She called out and hurriedly looked around in the hopes of finding him. Naruto.kun, oh. She ran in the direction she saw the blurs, but it led her to a dark alley. She entered cautiously, her Byakugan still active, and she sighed as Naruto joyfully approached her with a black rabbit in his mouth. The rabbit was adorable, but it appeared terrified beyond belief. His tails were wagging behind him, his ears were up, his eyes were closed, and he was still able to smile despite his full mouth. Naruto whimpered and dropped the rabbit, which jumped in Hinata's arms, saying, Naruto.kun, not again. Poor little guy. He's really afraid. The rabbit trembled in Hinata's embrace, and she held it close before setting it down, which caused it to vanish as soon as it hit the floor. Hinata smiled and said, come on Naruto.kun, let's go home. Naruto did not smile back, and he walked glumly next to Hinata, who was perplexed as to why Naruto was acting so strangely today. That evening. Be there for her in her hour of need. He probably wiped her out today with all his attempts to impress her and tell her he likes her, so Naruto waited solemnly for Hinata to go into her room and sleep. She went to get ready for bed, and Naruto decided to give her some space. He scratched the back of his left ear with his foot and shook his head, but he stopped when he heard Hinata open the door and looked up. She was dressed in a large white shirt and dark blue pajama pants, and she crawled into bed before saying a brief, "Good night," to Naruto before turning and becoming quiet. Naruto eyed her with concern. She was too quiet, even by her own standards. Hinata turned to face Naruto and noticed his anxious expression. "Nada. What's wrong, Nada?" Hinata gave Naruto a sorrowful smile as he asked. Naruto shook his head and said, "Nothing Naruto-kun, I'm okay." Hinata gasped as Naruto said, "Fox no smart, but fox no stupid." She then sat up in the lotus position and looked down. Hinata wiped away a silent tear, saying, It's nothing, I'm just being a baby." She was about to wipe away another one when she felt Naruto's tail do it for her, and when she looked up, she was slightly surprised to see Naruto grinning. Hinata blushed when Naruto said, "Nada no sad, Nada pretty when smiles." Naruto had always wanted to say something like that to her. Naruto went on, "Nada foxes, friend." Hinata gave Naruto a hug. Naruto hugged her back with all 9 of his tails after Hinata said, "Thank you Naruto-kun." She snuggled against his warm, soft tails as he held her close, and they remained that way until Hinata wiped away her tears and put some distance between them. She smiled at Naruto, and he smiled back. "What's the matter, Hinata?" Hinata gave him a strange look, shook her head, and laughed when Naruto asked. Naruto sat quietly as Hinata told him, "Today was the day my mother took me to the park before she died." Naruto said, "Fox listen." Hinata laughed and gave him another hug, her smile remaining intact despite the tears. "Go." When Hanabi was born, she was ecstatic. She insisted on taking me to the park even after I told her I could wait. Hinata whispered, "We had a great time that day." Her smile vanished as she said, "She watched me go down the slide, pushed me on the swings, and even played in a sandbox with me. Mom started to feel bad when we got home, and I became anxious." She hesitated, and when Naruto sensed her clutching one of his tails, he tightened his hold on her. "Papa told me that it was natural and that he was taking mother to the hospital." She cried into Naruto's chest and he closed his eyes and laid his head on top of hers, saying, "I never saw her after that. It wasn't fair. She still had so much to tell me, so much to teach me." Hinata continued to cry and Naruto remained silent. She cried for a long time before stopping and settling for sniffing. She then got up and wiped away her reams of tears. Naruto smiled at her as she said, I'm sorry Naruto-kun, I didn't mean to cry so much." Hinata blushed the deepest shade of red, her face heated up, her heart racing, and she thought that if he got any closer, her heart would leap out of her chest. "It okay?" he said, startling her when he crawled over to her and gently laid her on her back with one of his tails. Her mind went completely blank when Naruto hovered over her and stared at her softly. "Do anything you have to just to show her you care." "Nada." Naruto lowered his head and closed his eyes, and when he pressed his lips to Hinata's eyes widened, but then closed, and he felt his heart race, then break it after feeling as though it was about to leave his body. Naruto-kun. Shortly after, Hinata passed out. Naruto sighed and blinked before moving to her left side and resting his head on her stomach. His eyes slowly closed before he felt himself nodding off with a smile and a lip lick. There was a lone figure, limping and panting heavily through the Konoha forest, his short hair looking reddish-brown from the dirt in it, and after another minute of walking, the figure collapsed to its knees and fell forward, unconscious. A man was just a few minutes away from arriving in Konoha and finally taking a break from his journey from Tokigakure when he looked to his left and was startled to see a small silhouette resting on the ground. He was walking through a trail with all his inventory and he sighed with exhaustion. When he approached the silhouette, he gasped to see a young boy on the verge of death. "What a miserable kid. Don't worry, little one. You'll be safe now." The man picked up the young boy and left for Konoha with the rest of his belongings. Hinata closed her eyes and kept her mind open as she wandered around the Hyuga complex, images replaying the events of the night before, though she was still unsure if it had all been a dream or if it had really happened. Despite her head in the clouds, she gracefully avoided bumping into people, even avoiding Neji, who appeared to be in a hurry, because her whole attention was on her thoughts and she was unable to see how her fellow clansmen were responding to her strange expression. As she was thinking, Hinata heard a faint sound of muttering and rambling, and when she looked up to see one of Naruto's 9 tails wagging as he entered her room, she raised an eyebrow, wondering where exactly he had been all morning. As she woke up, she discovered that she was alone on her bed, with neither Naruto's hide nor his hair, which greatly perplexed her. When she asked if anyone had seen him, everyone's response had been the same: no. Hunched over her bed in the lotus position, Naruto continued his rambling tirade as he walked silently up to her room. Hinata heard a few grunts and occasionally heard him call her name. He turned his head just as she took her first step and grinned nervously as she attempted to sneak up behind him. "Why is Nada here?" Hinata tried to respond to his abrupt question, but her mind went blank as he asked in a suspicious manner. She kept looking at Naruto's lips, reminding her of the dream event from last night, which didn't help. Anyo, WL, Naruto's smile vanished as he approached Hinata, cocked his head, and gazed at her in confusion. "All right, Nada?" From Naruto's twitching, golden ears and waging tails to his inquisitive cerulean eyes, Hinata blushed. Her mind went into a fluffy and adorable overload, and she stammered unintelligibly as her knees gave way and her eyes closed. In order to catch her before she hit the floor, Naruto moved closer to her and used his tails. He gazed at her serene, pink, tinted face as he carefully laid her on the bed, and then he smiled and brought one of his tails forward, causing the book he was holding to drop into his hands. Before putting the book in his mouth and leaving the room, Naruto mumbled joyfully, "Night Nada." When Hinata sat up and extended her arms to the sky, she yawned and rubbed her left eye with her left hand before using her free, open silver orb to look around the room. She blinked repeatedly, wondering how she had gotten into her bed, and then she remembered Naruto and him doing something suspicious in her room. She shook her head, got up, and opened her room door. "Dad?" Heishi blinked as he stood in front of Hinata's door, his fist raised, prepared to knock, not anticipating that she would open it before he could do so. As Hinata kept staring at him, he coughed, "Ahem. Yes. Have you seen Uzumaki?" Hinata shook her head in response to his question. Hinata replied, "I was actually going to go find him." As her father kept giving her a questioning look, Hinata's perspiration fell. "Isn't he meant to be with you constantly?" Hinata gasped as he asked. "You're correct." As she ran down the hallway and around the corner, she sped past Heishi, who watched her leave and then shook her head. When Heishi returned to his quarters, he pondered, "I wonder how different she'd be if she were born a boy." On her way to the kitchen, Hinata sprinted past numerous rooms and family members. She decided to go to the next best spot, the backyard, but once again, she didn't see Naruto sleeping under his favorite tree or running around. When she went inside, she was disappointed to see that Naruto wasn't there, and she wondered why she had gone to the kitchen in the first place given that Naruto was banned from the area following the incident. Hinata was at a loss for ideas, and she could sense her panic beginning to override her sense of reason. Hinata turned to see Hanabi eating a bowl of cereal at the dining room table behind her. "If you're looking for Fox.Boy, he's in the library." "The library?" Hanabi nodded her head, but Hinata asked, obviously not believing her. She answered, "That's what I said." Hinata realized she couldn't help any longer as soon as she resumed eating her cereal. Hinata decided to check it out for herself because she was still unsure that Naruto was in the library. After pushing open the door, Hinata surveyed the large room with its bookshelves, desks, chairs, and other furniture. Since she couldn't see Naruto seated on any of the desks or chairs, she assumed he was concealed by the bookshelves. Wondering why they had so many books, she browsed the bookshelves in search of Naruto. Naruto.kun. With a giggle as drool poured from his mouth and his ears twitched occasionally, Hinata turned to the last bookshelf and saw Naruto sleeping, curled into a ball with a book serving as his pillow. She approached his sleeping form and knelt down, gently petting his head and occasionally touching his fluffy ears. Her curiosity was piqued when she noticed the open book, pillow beneath Naruto's head. Hinata sat down next to his head and watched him sleep for a while longer before carefully removing his pillow and replacing it with her lap. To ensure he wouldn't wake up, she turned the book over and opened it when she saw what it was about. Teen dating advice. She looked down at Naruto and questioned why he was on the chapter titled, "A Girl's Guide to Getting the Guy," that Naruto had opened in the book. Hinata waited for Naruto to wake up, still interested in the book he had, sighing as he wrinkled his nose, opened his mouth, and sneezed. She wondered if he would wake up, but he was still dead to the world. "So, how are you going to handle him?" The merchant, a man of athletic build with dark brown hair and green eyes, looked at the professor gravely as Sarutobi asked him. "At first, I assumed that you, Hokage Sama, would handle him. However," the merchant paused, then said, "He just reminds me so much of her." Sarutobi nodded his head, knowing who the merchant was referring to, and mentally raised an eyebrow at the man's response. "If I may ask, sir," the merchant said boldly, "why are you going to such lengths for this particular one, even though a child's life is important?" he inquired. Sarutobi sighed as he surveyed his office. The merchant's stoic face broke as his eyes widened, if only slightly. The child you want to adopt is of a prestige clan, so to speak. Sarutobi began, enticing the merchant. If I do allow you to adopt him and his biological father finds out about this, then there could be dire consequences for this village. Who exactly is this kid? The businessman inquired. The merchant's eyes had grown to the size of saucers as he processed what Sarutobi had just explained. He is the child of Sanagakure's current Kazekage. Are you serious? What is he doing? Unconscious, just outside the village's walls if that is the case? Sarutobi shook his head in response to his question. He was very vague. Is he conscious? The businessman inquired. The merchant looked to Sarutobi's left and saw a man leaning against the open window, saying, he shouldn't have slept at all. He was a tall man with very long, spiky white hair tied back in a ponytail, 2 shoulder-length bangs framing both sides of his face, red lines running down from his eyes, and a horned forehead protector with the kanji for oil. He was dressed in a short green shirt, a kimono, and matching colored pants, with mesh armor peeking out from the legs and sleeves of his outfit. The only real hint at his cautious nature. Completed with hand guards, a black belt, wooden sandals, a red cloak with 2 simple yellow circles, and a giant scroll on his back. Master Jiraiya. Jiraiya nodded his head in acknowledgement, saying, I apologize, but I don't understand. That brat is special. He contains something devious and evil in him, and when he is unconscious, it takes hold of his body. Jiraiya stated to the vendor. Do you mean that he is a Jinchuriki? Similar to the 6 Paths Sage? What would you tell me? The merchant asked, and Jiraiya nodded. Although I did ask, it appears that this is a top secret matter. Jiraiya stated, it is. Then why? I believe you stated that you wanted to adopt him. The merchant gave Sarutobi a disbelieving look. You're allowing me to adopt him? Sarutobi looked into the merchant's eyes and then gave him a gentle smile as he asked. Sarutobi said gravely, you're going to have to be careful with him. The merchant nodded and grinned. Jiraiya pushed himself off the windowsill and approached the merchant as he stood, saying, I'll take you to him. There are a couple of things I feel I should warn you about him. Nothing major but still. Darkness in the dark, there are no rules, no safe haven, and no way out of the shadows. Darkness is a dangerous place for anyone else, but for this child, it felt completely natural. Despite his father's importance, he was treated as though he came from a family of traitors and thieves, and he was resented and shunned like a plague. He detested his life, which was full of loneliness and misery. He never left his house except to go to school, and even then, it didn't feel like a home. He detested the fact that his brother and sister were afraid of him and either ignored him or were extremely cautious around him. The darkness, the serene and sweet abyss, was the only place he knew as home. His eyes were so good that he didn't need light to see what was around him, even in a room with virtually no light. Right now, he was in an empty room with a white porcelain tile floor, a single bed, and a small lamp. The door, or what he assumed was the door, was close to the lamp, and the child could tell that this room was either used for the clinically insane or simply a place where they wanted to keep someone in and keep them from leaving. However, he didn't care because he had already fled his previous life and would sooner die than go back to it. His thoughts were cut short when he heard 3 locks open and the door, at least to him, magically materialized. His darkness. Adapted eyes could not handle the brightness of the outside light, and it stung when it got there. He blinked and lifted his left hand to shield his eyes from the hallway light. Who is present? The child's voice was dry and rough as he asked. The child saw 2 silhouettes, one of a tall, white-haired man, and another of a man with dark brown hair who was not quite as tall as the first. The white-haired man said, Gaara. Gaara pointed to Jiraiya, who nodded, and said, It's you, the man from before. You're correct. We must have one last conversation. I'd like to start by introducing you to Roka Zaraki, your new guardian. Roka waved and grinned at Gaara. My guardian. Jiraiya nodded in response to Gaara's question. Gaara glanced at both men before scoffing and turning away. He's agreed to take you in and raise you as his own. Jiraiya and Roka exchanged confused glances as he obstinately declared, I'm not falling for this again. Why should I accept him? Gaara inquired, and Jiraiya blinked before grinning and crossing his arms over his chest. You're not excited to go back to Suna, are you, Gaara? I remember that during our interrogation. Gaara glared at Jiraiya, his eyes twitching. Gaara gave a low growl and closed his eyes, saying, The only other thing you can do is to stay here with Roka. Tormenting me is your only pastime, right? Jiraiya laughed when Gaara asked. Gaara got up and approached Roka and Jiraiya, saying, "Shut up, brat, and get up. We need to fill you in on a couple of things if you plan on staying in Konoha." Jiraiya added, "It's a lot different than Suna, that's for sure." Sitting opposite each other, Gaara and Roka gazed at one another. Gaara, being the child that he was, merely scoffed silently and stared after Roka had given him a brief tour of Konoha. Now that they were at his house, they had done nothing but stare at one another, waiting for the other to blink or turn his head. An hour ago, this started. Finally, weary of their little game, Roka closed his eyes and sighed, while Gaara smiled in his mind at his vacuous triumph. "What is the matter with you? You're so quiet and emotionless," Roka said, and Gaara blinked, not anticipating such a direct inquiry. "Most children are noisy and irritable." Gaara responded, "As you've noticed during the last hour, I am not like most children." He was trying to avoid killing his so-called guardian. Jiraiya had told Gaara that he was not permitted to kill anyone. Apparently, Suna was not the only place where Gaara's reputation for murdering people who irritated him had been discussed. "That makes sense to me, but why?" Roka persisted. He knew why he was different from other kids, of course, but all he wanted was to talk to Gaara, and this was the only thing that sprang to mind. With a hazy response, he said, "A lot of things." Roka started to perspire. "Like?" Roka raised an eyebrow, saying, "The weather." Although that might seem like a sarcastic response on paper, Gaara came across as serious in his response. Roka remarked, "You sound serious. Is there any justification for making jokes?" Roka shook his head when Gaara asked. "How is the weather?" "It's too bright, I prefer the dark." "I see." Gaara and Roka continued to stare at one another, and Roka ended the conversation there by rubbing the back of his neck with his left hand and letting out another, longer sigh. "I'm going to bed now." Pointing to the hallway behind him, Roka said, "Your room is down this hall. The last room is on the left. Your bathroom is the final room on the right." He pointed to the room behind Gaara and said, "You are in the living room right now, and the kitchen is right over there." Gaara watched as Roka dragged his feet languidly across the floor and said, "If you need anything, think twice before knocking on my door." Roka's room was the first door on the right. "Roka." Roka halted his stride and looked at Gaara. "What made you choose to adopt me?" Roka laughed as he closed his eyes, leaving his left hand behind his neck, and Gaara asked, his curiosity finally winning out. Roka responded, "Because you didn't seem like most kids." Gaara considered Roka's response, got up from the couch, and went to his new room, shutting the door behind him. "One last thing," Roka said, halting Gaara's attempt to enter his room. "You might want to get some rest. You got school in the morning." Roka's smile was deceptive, and Gaara shuddered for an unknown reason, but it wouldn't be long before he learned firsthand about the atrocities of Konoha's academy and its notorious fangirls. Time. Skip. 2 years. With a smile on her face, 13-year-old Hinata strolled down the street, accompanied by a contented 13-year-old Naruto. Since Hinata would be taking the graduation exam in a few hours and passing it with flying colors, the time has finally come for her to show her father that her time at the academy was worthwhile. She looked down at Naruto, and although she smiled, she was concerned for him. It was nothing complicated, just throwing kunai, shuriken, a written test, and a final jutsu inspection of sorts. His handwriting and general literary style were completely different, even though his speech pattern had improved. Nevertheless, she hoped he would pass, and if he did, Naruto would undoubtedly be on her side because he must be by her side virtually constantly. Hinata pondered whether Naruto still harbored feelings for her in the midst of this thought. Naruto was as loving as ever the day after he kissed her 2 years prior. He would constantly cuddle her leg, lick her face whenever he had the chance, and do numerous other things that demonstrated his feelings for Hinata. However, Hinata felt that she would be exploiting Naruto, so she chose not to bring up that night with him. As her father and the third Hokage have previously explained to her, an incident occurred that blocked his consciousness, and he only followed his instincts. He was unable to speak, at least not well enough to fully express his feelings, and appeared to operate solely on instinct. Though Hinata is too scared to tell him how she feels, she had noticed that Naruto appeared to have finally regained consciousness and had actually considered his options, and that he was now mentally capable of being alone without anyone having to fear that he would attack them. Now that he has the ability to think, what if he decides he no longer likes her? Will he find her too strange or uninteresting? She sighed and wished against all hope that one day she would be able to express her feelings to Naruto without being overly concerned about his response. At least not to the extent that her fear would be paralyzed by his unknowable reaction. While keeping his hands in his pockets, keeping his head up, and using his hind legs, another skill he picked up during his time with the Hyugas, Naruto hummed joyfully. In addition to being more cautious and hesitant than usual, especially around her, he had been a little more reclusive and just plain strange lately. Naruto simply wouldn't let any male of her age, or older, for that matter, get any closer than 5 feet away from her. He would either snarl and bark or brush them away with his tail, or tails, depending on the situation. Her father is the only person who is permitted to be close to her. Now that she was staring at her best friend, crush, Hinata couldn't help but wonder what was going through Naruto Uzumaki's mind. Naruto began, "Hey Nada," causing Hinata to perspire. The number of times he had attempted to avoid writing by walking on all fours was, in Hinata's opinion, hilarious, and in Naruto's literature teacher's opinion, possibly the most annoying thing that happened in her everyday life. Naruto had spent the last 2 years learning how to use his thumbs, speak a fair amount of proper grammar, write it decently enough to pass kindergarten, and stand on his hind legs and walk. However, the young Hyuga had observed that he hardly ever called Hinata Hinata. Instead, he always seemed to prefer Nada, and he had been more than hesitant to change that. Yes, Naruto-kun. It appeared as though Hinata's smile was a little forced. Hinata gave him a strange look and said, "Fox never thought you knew Sakura." When she didn't respond to him immediately, Naruto turned to face her and at last noticed that she was staring at him. Are you intentionally doing that?" At this, Naruto arched an eyebrow. "What should I do? Saying it wrong." "What's wrong, saying?" "Your grammar, when you talk, when I speak." Naruto-kun. Hinata gave him a slight glare as Naruto laughed. Hinata gave him a little more attention before realizing that he was still having difficulty speaking clearly. "Fox is sorry Nada, you know Fox is playing." "So, Naruto-kun, what was the question you asked?" she inquired. "You were acquainted with Sakura?" Naruto wrinkled his face up as Hinata nodded. Hinata chuckled when she heard how sincerely he said, "She smell funny." "She does? How does she smell?" Hinata inquired, a little taken aback by the abruptness of the exchange. Naruto furrowed his brow further, searching for the ideal words to convey Sakura's aroma. Hinata blinked repeatedly as Naruto responded, "She smells like Sakura. It's a funny smell. Not as bad as Neji's cooking, but not as good as Nada." Hinata blushed at Naruto's remark about her scent. "She smells more like Sakura when she's around Teme." "You believe I have a pleasant scent?" she asked hesitantly, and Naruto nodded sharply and rapidly in response. "Yes, you have a wonderful scent. You have Nada's scent, except when Fox isn't around you," Naruto said with a loud cheer before assuming a contemplative look. Though not quite sure what he meant, Hinata gave him a questioning look. "You still smell like Hinata, but know that much." "What?" Naruto smiled sheepishly as he observed her. With a slight flush on his cheeks, he hurriedly answered, "Nothing." "Academy?" Hinata watched Naruto with a strange mix of amusement and bewilderment as he ran directly for the academy and shouted with fake joy. When Hinata saw Naruto explode through the doors, she heard other children yell in surprise and others yell his name in rage. She shook off all the past thoughts and ran to catch up to him, laughing when he turned his head, stuck out his tongue, dropped on all fours, and ran faster. Hinata sped past the children who were taken aback by Naruto and noticed a few picking up papers that had likely fallen from the bombshell that was Naruto. Naruto was sitting in front of their classroom door, staring expectantly at it, which startled her. "What's the matter?" His gaze remained fixed on the door as Hinata asked him. Naruto replied, "Panda is in there." Hinata sighed as she looked up at the door and opened it, followed closely by Naruto, who cautiously scanned the classroom until he spotted the red-haired boy he had mentioned earlier. "Why are you so against him?" With his gaze fixed on Gaara's, Naruto shook his head in response to Hinata's question. Naruto said incoherently, "Not hate but, there's something about him." Hinata glanced at Naruto, then at Gaara, who turned his attention from Naruto to Hinata and maintained eye contact for a short while longer before closing his eyes and losing awareness of his surroundings. Naruto continued to stare at him before turning to face Hinata with a serious expression. Hinata nodded her head and giggled at Naruto's silly smile as he said, "Nada, Fox want ramen." "Then I'll make father buy you as much ramen as you want." Hinata paused for a moment before snapping her fingers. "If you pass the graduation exam, then," Naruto's eyes widened, his smile grew, and his tongue protruded, drooling. "Ramen." After cheering, Naruto sniffed the air and turned to face the final Konoha, aligned Uchiha. Naruto scowled at him and said, "Dobi." As he brushed past the young fox demon and made his way to his seat, Sasuke grinned and said, "Teme." Naruto snarled at his opponent with disdain and irritation. Naruto snarled and scrunched his nose before putting on a blank expression and then smirking as well, his fangs giving his smirk a sinister appearance with promises of chaos and retaliation concealed in his eyes. Teme. I know like Teme, Naruto said, and Hinata grabbed his left arm and dragged him to their seats in the back. Sasuke watched as Naruto was dragged to his chair with a smirk. Sasuke turned to face the front, cupped his left cheek with his left hand, and retreated into his thoughts, dismissing it as nothing. Naruto's smirk subsided into a genuine one as he turned to face Hinata after he sat down. His smile grew as Hinata said, Nada bring lunch? Naruto inquired, and Hinata gave a quiet smile. Naruto nodded and said, not now, Naruto-kun. Fox just want to know what Fox gonna eat. Hinata laughed and rummaged through the bag in which she had kept their lunch. Naruto's smile vanished, and he turned to face Sasuke, whose eyes glowed a spooky red, before three Narutos materialized behind him. The first Naruto smirked slyly as his image turned hazy and transformed into Sakura, while the second and third Narutos also did the same, but unlike the first doppelganger whose shape shifted into Sakura, this one vanished from view. As Sakura descended the stairs to Sasuke's level and sat directly beside him, she wore the same smirk as the previous Naruto. Sasuke raised an eyebrow but remained silent, and Sakura continued to stare at him with a gleam in her eyes that began to frighten him. What? He inquired, obviously irritated, but Sakura didn't seem to notice. What do you want? Sakura approached more and more at this point, but Sasuke stopped her from bursting his own bubble. He said angrily, get away from. But before he could say anything more, he fell out of his chair while attempting to escape. Sakura. Sasuke didn't know that the first invisible Naruto had put a bucket of blue paint beneath his desk, which he knocked over with his feet as he fell, or what the second invisible Naruto had done with his own bucket of blue paint. Sasuke was expecting to hit the ground and then glare at Sakura. As the paint splattered all over his body, Sasuke wore a bewildered expression, glaring at Naruto when he realized that only he would do such a thing and looking up to see no Sakura. Unaware of his prank.in motion, Hinata was telling Naruto what she had brought for lunch the entire time, and the original Naruto choked back a laugh at what his clones had done. In response to Hinata's knowing and reprimanding gaze, Naruto blinked and said, Naruto-kun. That was you, wasn't it? She inquired, and Naruto gave a humiliated laugh. Before Hinata could confront him about his deception, Iruka rushed into the room, his face as bright and red as a fresh dot out of the fire metallic substance. Naruto responded, Fox has no idea what Nada talking about. Who was responsible? The scarred teacher's calm but tense voice emerged. Normally, he would yell when he was angry, but at this moment, his anger was so great that his quiet, calm tone was worse than any eardrum bursting yell could ever be. Iruka. Sensei. Naruto cheered as he jumped on top of the desk on all fours. Who did what? Naruto inquired. Who applied blue paint to the teacher's lounge? Naruto cocked his head to the left in response to Iruka's question. Naruto made every effort to pronounce the word, but he was unable to do so. Vandaling. Vandalized. Refers to the fact that the teacher's lounge was tampered with. Shikamaru, who was seated in the row beneath Naruto, remarked, how troublesome. Shikamaru perspired and said, ah, Shika, Fox no see you there. Shikamaru put his head on the table and went back to sleep, sighing, I was hoping you didn't, me in my mouth. Enough. With his patience already running low, Iruka yelled, I just want to know who did it. Iruka narrowed her eyes at Sasuke as he stood up. So, Sasuke, it was you? How unfortunate, and you were a very promising student, Sasuke said, blinking as he looked at his blue hands. Sasuke gaped when Iruka said, I'm glad I can't stop you from taking the graduation test, but you'll be cleaning the classroom and the teacher's lounge for 3 months. What? Iruka gave one head nod. Sasuke let out an angry sigh as he sat down, and the sound of his wet shirt and pants hitting the sturdy chair echoed throughout the classroom. You heard me, now sit down and be quiet. Is everyone present? Everyone heard quick footsteps that grew louder by the second until the door was blasted off its hinges and Sasuke's fangirls, including his top 2 fangirls, Sakura Haruno and Ino Yamanaka, entered the room. Iruka asked, his voice still dripping with anger. I'll take a seat beside him, Sakura shouted. No, I am, Ino shot back. Shino happened to sit next to the frightened Sasuke before any of the fangirls could approach him. Sasuke sighed and thanked whatever higher power was observing him from above. Get moving, bug. Freak, Ino yelled, and Shino gave her a sidelong glance before ignoring her and the other irate fangirls entirely. Ladies, I'm not in the mood to deal with this. Go find another seat to sit in and let's begin. The fangirls muttered to themselves as they looked for a different seat that was closer to Sasuke. All of them suddenly snapped out of their anger and turned to face Iruka. Now then. Iruka cleared his throat while addressing all of his pupils, saying, "To some of you, today marks your final day as academy students." Iruka grinned and went on, "For others, you will have another chance next year. Let's head outside now to start." The entire classroom moved to the back of the academy where the first part of the test would be taken, and Naruto stood next to Hinata outside the academy, sighing as he sniffed the fresh air. A group of trees only 50 feet away populated the back of the academy, their leaves dancing as the gentle breeze forced them to do so. The sun shone brightly over the heads of many of the Konoha villagers, and a gentle breeze blew past the entire village. Clouds had not yet appeared, but Naruto was relieved because they would have destroyed the lovely cerulean sea that was the sky. Apart from nature, 3 dummies with a red bullseye painted on their stomachs stood tall, 10 feet from the starting position, and at least 5 feet apart from one another. About 17 feet from the starting position, 2 targets were tied to a post that was continuously being moved from one end of the field to the other, and 1 additional target was hung from a tree. To pass this part of the test, Iruka started out. "You are to hit the first 3 dummies as accurately as you can with the 10 kunai shuriken I'm going to give you," he went on. "You can attempt to hit the other 3 targets, though, if you'd like some extra credit. By choosing to try the extra credit, you will receive 2 shuriken and 3 more kunai. Shino Aburame will go first." Shino approached the starting line, directly next to a table that contained 5 shuriken and 5 kunai. "Shino, will you attempt the extra credit?" Iruka smiled as he put extra shuriken and kunai in place, exactly as he had promised. Shino considered that question and then nodded his head. In addition to hitting the target hanging from the tree and one of the moving targets twice, Shino was able to hit all 3 of the dummies in the center after throwing his 15 shuriken kunai. As he made his way to the back of the line, Shino nodded his head and said, "Congratulations, you passed this part, Shino, next." As he watched Sasuke throw his weapons, he outperformed everyone else, and now his cheer squad was roaring with approval and joy. Naruto rolled his eyes, admitting that Sasuke did pretty well, but he didn't hear anyone applaud when Hinata did well as well. Well, he cheered, but that wasn't the point. She outperformed every other girl who tried. As his name was called, Naruto grinned and said, "Naruto Uzumaki, it's your turn." Hinata smiled and blushed as she said, "Good luck, Naruto-kun." Naruto nodded his head and approached the line. "Naruto, will you attempt the extra credit?" Before Iruka could set down the additional weapons, Naruto fell to his knees and 6 tails shot up, shimmering in the intense sunlight that shone down from them before tiny needles shot out of them, and each tail struck each target with such accuracy that it would have embarrassed even a child prodigy. Naruto nodded his head sharply, and as he finished shooting needles from his tail, the needles seemed to go on forever. When he was done, Naruto stood and faced Iruka. Iruka scribbled something on his notepad and shook his head. "It doesn't count, in my opinion, but if you hit the targets with anything, you could probably do the same with a shuriken or kunai. However, I don't think you can use a kunai to strike them with the same accuracy." Naruto grinned at this. Naruto returned to Hinata, who was grinning with pride, and said, "Fox passed, that's all Fox cares about. You have my utmost admiration, Naruto-kun." Naruto's smirk turned into a silly smile when Hinata said that. Fox proud of Nada, too. Gaara, who was dressed in a dark red shirt, black hakama pants, black open-toed shoes, and a black, plain headband around his forehead, appeared between them as Sasuke muttered, "Lucky shots." Naruto heard him and stuck his tongue out at him. "My turn. Gaara Zaraki, you're up next." Gaara approached the line patiently and gazed at the weapons. He was tempted to stop Iruka and simply form his sand into shuriken to blast away the targets, but he recalled Roka telling him that it was best if he hid his talent until he became a genin. "I'll take on the extra credit," Gaara said apathetically. Iruka placed the extra weapons, and Gaara watched with a mental smirk at a sudden thought. He smuggled sand onto each kunai and shuriken he grabbed, then threw the weapons and used his talent to change the weapon's course and hit each target dead in the center. Gaara shrugged his shoulders and turned back to the other students. "Not including that cheater," Iruka said, emphasizing the word while glancing at Naruto, who grinned mischievously. "You did better than anyone here." "Great, let's go back inside and take the written part now that everyone has finished." Haruka exclaimed, beaming, while Naruto scowled and let out a loud moan, expressing his distaste for this section of the test. Naruto stood in front of Haruka and Mizuki after he blew the test, waiting for them to tell him when to start. Mizuki said, "Okay, Naruto, you can start whenever you're ready." Naruto nodded and grinned, but he wanted to punch Mizuki in the face on the inside because he smelled like a snake and saw something about him that made him seem fake. He wanted to kick Mizuki's ass, but he added, "You can do it, Naruto." When Naruto closed his eyes, the far right tail began to wag steadily behind him, and a moment later, a second Naruto appeared on Naruto's right, sitting on his hind legs and grinning. Haruka and Mizuki nodded and jotted down something on their notepads. The image of the two Narutos became blurry before the first transformed into an exact replica of Haruka and the second into the fourth Hokage. "Excellent work, Naruto." Haruka praised him, and Naruto grinned proudly. He always appreciated what Haruka had to say about him. "Continue." Naruto nodded as he closed his eyes once more, and this time the tail on the far left started to wag. Haruka grinned with pride, and Mizuki grinned too, albeit more artificially. Haruka furrowed his brow as Mizuki threw a mock kunai at Naruto on the right, who, poof, ed, out of existence when it struck. And now the substitution jutsu. Haruka reprimanded, "I thought we said to use the substitution jutsu." Haruka arched an eyebrow in response to Naruto's statement, "Fox did, that was Fox too." "So fast?" Naruto nodded in response to his question. Mizuki said, "Try again." Haruka nodded and threw another mock kunai and Naruto, who poofied again and was replaced by a chair that had been behind him. "Fantastic work, Naruto." Mizuki sneered before turning to face Haruka and putting on his mask once more. "You pass," Haruka said, tossing him a black forehead protector with a metal plate in the center and the village's symbol engraved on it. Naruto, on all fours, caught it with his mouth, bowed, and left the room with all 9 tails wagging behind him. Haruka, did he not perform exceptionally well? Haruka pretended that Naruto had been his son by nodding and grinning broadly. As Gaara entered the room, Mizuki nodded and said, "I'm very proud of him. Now all we have to do is test one last student and we'll be done." "All right, Gaara, you know what to do." Gaara nodded as he made a hand gesture to gather chakra, then created a clone out of smoke. Gaara dispersed the clone as soon as he saw Haruka and Mizuki nod their heads, and without missing a beat, he called forth some of his chakra and changed into Haruka's appearance. Mizuki remarked, "Good job, Gaara." Gaara then resumed his prior performance. Now for the last part. Haruka and Mizuki shook their heads, but were stopped cold when Gaara turned light brown and scattered into a pile of sand after Mizuki tossed a mock kunai at him, striking his forehead. "How did I do, then?" Haruka glanced to his left to see Gaara with his arms folded as he asked. "Gaara, you passed with flying colors. However, could you please tell me where you learned the sand clone jutsu?" Haruka inquired. Gaara said, "From Roka." Mizuki arched an eyebrow. "Your protector?" Gaara nodded when he asked. Before approaching Haruka and getting a red forehead protector, Gaara said in a distance, "He's an interesting man, to say the least." Haruka glanced at Mizuki after Gaara had left the room. "Don't you think that's strange?" Mizuki gave a shoulder shrug. Haruka nodded as Mizuki remarked, "He is a merchant. He could have found a scroll on sand clones during his trips." "I suppose that's true. Did you ever discover who had vandalized the teacher's lounge, by the way?" Haruka nodded when Mizuki asked. "Sasuke was the one. His hands were covered in blue paint when I asked my class." Mizuki gave a nod of comprehension before coming up with a solution. "How would he, however, get the footprints and handprints into the ceiling?" Haruka considered it after Mizuki asked. "You're right. There is only one person that we know who can scale walls." Haruka's face flushed. "At least, someone whose handprints were small enough to match the ones in the lounge." "Naruto." With great gusto, Naruto gulped down the ramen in front of him. Hiyashi saw Naruto steal nearly half of his own money. "Please stop making the slurping noises, Tokyo." With noodles dangling from his mouth, Naruto gazed up at Hiyashi, who asked, a vein protruding from his head. Hiyashi looked away as Naruto muttered, "FFFX Hunki." Hinata suppressed her blush and giggles as she said, "Naruto-kun, please don't talk with your mouth full." She thought he looked adorable with the noodles in his mouth. Naruto grinned at Hiyashi after swallowing the noodles whole and nodding in comprehension. Before slurping up more noodles, Naruto repeated, "Fox said, Fox hungry." Tucci chuckled as he watched his favorite customer finish his 30th ramen, observing Heishi looking at the ramen with annoyance and contempt. If you know he's only going to dry you out, why bring him here? Tucci inquired. Heishi proudly remarked, it's his reward. It's also part of Hinata's reward. Hinata glanced at her father as she set down her chopsticks. Component. Heishi gave a nod. Hinata grinned as she finished her ramen a bit faster than before, and Naruto glanced at her out of the corner of his eye before deciding to end it at 30.1. I'm proud of both of you. This is Naruto's reward and you'll get yours as soon as we head home. Tucci nodded as he went to get a second bowl after Naruto said, one more, old man. You're thrilled to be a shinobi now, Naruto? Naruto gave a forceful nod of his head. Fox's dream is to become a shinobi. Naruto said, Fox wants to be good like Alpha. Heishi was taken aback by this response and did not understand what he meant, but Hinata did. Alpha? As Hinata finished her ramen, she burst out laughing. He's talking about you, Dad. You're Alpha. Heishi gave Naruto a long look before grinning and averting his eyes. Naruto closed his eye and grinned, I see. Then he heard a bowl being set down in front of him, and his smile grew as he ate the ramen quickly, wiping his mouth with his hands and pushing the bowl back with one of his tails while patting his stomach. With satisfaction, Naruto uttered, Fox full. Hinata flushed when Heishi said, then let's go home, I'm sure Hinata is dying to see her reward. Come on. After paying for the 30.1 ramens, Heishi joined them. See ya, old man. Naruto said as he leapt from his seat and walked next to Hinata. Naruto jumped on the couch, lying on his stomach and resting his head over his crossed arms beneath his chin as they reached the Hyuga compound. The way he readied himself for Hinata's gift made Hinata laugh. Hinata nodded and sat beside Naruto after Heishi said, stay here while I go get it. He then placed one of his tails in front of her and two at her sides, tickling her, and she began to laugh more loudly as Naruto's tails became unrelenting. Naruto.kun, please, she said, laughing until her eyes began to well up with tears. It tickles. Naruto laughed as she screamed. Hinata calmed down enough that when Heishi entered the room, he only saw Hinata wiping away the tiny tears in her eyes. That's the point. Naruto said, stopping when he smelled Heishi approaching. He was holding an indigo box when Hinata looked up at him. Heishi said, congratulations, Hinata, you deserve it. Hinata accepted the box, and Naruto placed his chin on her left shoulder to watch her open it with a small hand. A shield for the forehead? Uncertain of her gift, Hinata questioned, I already received one from Iruka. Sensei. Hinata pointed to the choker she was wearing, a forehead protector. With tears in her eyes, Hinata exclaimed, it's not just any forehead protector. It belonged to your mother. She put the gift down, stood up, and gave Heishi a hug. Holding his eldest daughter, Heishi grinned and said, thank you, father. Hinata, you're welcome. You both go upstairs now. To find out which teams you'll be on, you still need to visit the academy tomorrow. Hinata and Naruto nodded. As he followed Hinata to their room, Naruto remarked, Fox likes your present, Nada. Naruto grinned when Hinata said, me too, Naruto.kun.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.